Chapter 68 Poison. Chapter 68 Poison. As for the other techniques, Han Li held high expectations for the Heaven's Eye technique after witnessing the terrifying power that the seemingly simple fireball technique contained. After executing it, however, Han Li understood that this magic technique was simply a small transfer of energy into one's eyes. There was hardly any difficulty worth mentioning, making it appear as if it were easy to master. However, the Heaven's Eye technique seemed easy to master because its difficulty was directly proportional to the strength of its target. It grew increasingly more difficult to master it as the target's strength increased. Its functions focused primarily on checking the strength and purity of the magic power belonging to cultivators, making it a useful support-type magic technique. At first, Han Li was exhilarated and used the Heaven's Eye technique on both of his eyes. He then used his eyes, now filled with magic power, to inspect his own body's condition. Through his enhanced perception, he saw a dim layer of white light permeating his body. The closer he got to his dantian, the more dense the white light became. The white light was his magic power. When Han Li saw this, he couldn't help but extend a hand to touch the white light. However, he felt nothing at all. He noticed that magic power was similar to air. Both were incorporeal and without form, and only through the use of the Heaven's Eye technique could he hope to inspect it. But after several consecutive inspections, Han Li completely lost all interest in the Heaven's Eye technique. His loss of interest was due to the fact that he was all alone in the entire Seven Mysteries Sect. Who could he use the Heaven's Eye technique on? He couldn't possibly spend the whole day narcissistically examining himself. Therefore, aside from intensifying his training of the fireball technique, which he hoped to be able to familiarize himself with in order to use it during actual combat, Han Li turned his attention to other types of magic technique that he had yet to learn. He began practicing other magic techniques slowly and in a repetitive manner, hoping for more breakthroughs. Slightly regaining a portion of his body's energy, Han Li could only sigh after thinking about the difficulty of training in other magic techniques. The frequency of his complaints, however, decreased significantly over time as he continued practicing the techniques. Dong dong. The clock near the valley entrance was sounded, its chime spreading into the valley. Han Li wrinkled his eyebrows. He didn't know why, but recently the amount of people who came for help had suddenly increased. Furthermore, a majority of them had broken hands, broken arms, knife wounds, projectile wounds, and other similar external injuries. He did not dare to neglect his patients because aiding a person is like aiding in putting out a fire *. He collected himself and grabbed his medical bag. After exiting his house, Han Li made a beeline for the valley entrance. TL, *** idiom, both saving a person and putting out a fire need to be done immediately and with the utmost care. Outside the valley forest entrance early in the morning, Han Li saw a high-ranking disciple wearing embroidered clothing. The disciple anxiously paced to and fro near the big clock like an ant on a hot pan. Upon seeing Han Li, he immediately hurried towards him. "Dr. Han, please follow me. My master has been poisoned and is on the verge of death. I respectfully ask if you would take a look to see if you can remove the poison from his body." As this person approached, Han Li realized that the disciple had a familiar face. Having seen him a few times, he realized that the man was Elder Li's most favored disciple, Ma Rong, who had previously come to visit Han Li several times on behalf of his master, Elder Li. Therefore, Ma Rong could almost be considered an acquaintance. "Poison?" Han Li asked while immediately walking down the road. As they hurried along, Han Li asking darkly about the details behind Elder Li's misfortune. Han Li was aware that there was some poison that even he himself had no experience with. "Yes, my master got into a fight with a member of the Feral Wolf gang while traveling down the mountains to take care of some business. In the end, he was not careful and suffered an attack from a dark green seed-looking item. At first, my master was not overly worried and even retaliated by killing his opponent. Who knew that the poison would suddenly take effect on the way back up the mountain, causing him to fall unconscious? Have you tried to seek the aid of other doctors?" "Of course we did. If it was any ordinary poison, then I would not have come to trouble Dr. Han. Those quack doctors, other than knowing that my master suffered from a rare poison, knew nothing else. They did not even dare to prescribe a medicine." Ma Rong spoke with an extremely dissatisfied face. As Han Li listened, his facial expression did not change. As he hurriedly followed Ma Rong down the path, the only noise he made was N. Soon, however, doubt arose in his heart. Truthfully, he was not extremely well versed in curing poisons. If it was an internal or external injury, he he could depend on several types of medicinal herbs. If he had to treat some rare deadly poison, however, he was not sure that he would be able to provide a solution to the problem. Even though he had the pure spirit powder, an antidote that could cure hundreds of poisons, the world contained an innumerable amount of poisons. Who knew whether the pure spirit power could cure the specific poison that was harming Elder Li? The few local doctors were not completely useless in the healing and dispelling poisons. Otherwise, they would have been kicked off the mountain by the elders of the Seven Mysteries Sect. After all, the sect could not afford to raise a group of incompetent medical disciples who were unable to heal even the smallest of injuries. However, they did not dare to even prescribe a simple prescription, showing that this poison was a troublesome problem that they have never encountered before. Han Li could only survive by having many hidden cards and being able to adapt himself to any situation. Even if he was unable to save Elder Li, it wasn't likely that it would lower his own reputation. After all, there was no medicinal god that could cure every sickness. As Han Li was carefully refining his plan, Ma Rong practically forced Han Li to run lightly while grasping the sleeves of his garment. In this manner, the two hurried towards Elder Li's residence. Seeing him so energetic, Han Li knew that their master-to-disciple relationship was pretty deep. Han Li felt slightly sorrowful because he thought back to his relationship with Dr. Mo. Although they were master and disciples in name, their actual relationship was similar to two enemies. If only their relationship had been as harmonious as the one between Ma Rong and his master. In the depths of his heart, Han Li had always held a form of respect towards Dr. Mo. After all, his medicinal knowledge and eternal spring arts had been imparted to him by the deceased doctor. But sadly, things were not meant to be. The heavens dictated that the two would be unable to live in the same world, forcing them to fight an intensive battle in which Dr. Mo died accidentally by Han Li's own hands. Thinking about his past memories, Han Li couldn't help but sigh. Afterwards, Ma Rong brought him to Elder Li's place. Chapter 69, Li Feiyu and the Young Lady. Chapter 69, Li Feiyu and the Young Lady. Elder Li's residence was not extravagant. Instead, it was merely a small, humble house. Surrounding several houses in close proximity was a 2-meter-high, half-a-meter-thick dirt wall encircling a simple courtyard. Facing the path was an arched, half-moon gateway through which Han Li could see that the courtyard was filled with many visitors. Stepping into the courtyard, Han Li realized that the actual number of people was much higher than what he saw from outside the gate. They gathered in groups of 2s or 3s, discussing Elder Li's state in low voices. Han Li had already heard that Elder Li was a good-natured person in the Seven Mysteries Sect. Regardless if one was a lower-ranked disciple or an esteemed colleague, he rarely got angry with anyone, nor did he scramble for power and profit in the sect. As a result, many figures in the sect, both the important and the insignificant, had nothing but compliments for the old man, causing his popularity to be very high. Not that Elder Li was suffering from a poison-induced illness. Everyone with high status in the sect would eventually pay their respects either personally or through a representative. Not a single person failed to do so regardless if their reason for coming was heartfelt or hypocritic. As a result, the courtyard soon became filled by a throng of people. Once Han Li came in, he was recognized by the people in the courtyard. The lowest protectors immediately surrounded him, each striving to be the first to greet him. "How are you, medicinal god Han?" Dr. Han came. A wave of well-wishing rang out and continuously battered his ears. Even if he didn't want to hear the endless noise, he had no choice but to endure. Seeing these faces brimming with enthusiasm, Han Li similarly showed a bright smile that did not lose to the crowd in terms of splendor. However, although he appeared to be extremely courteous, he was actually sick of false pleasantries. Fortunately, those with high status, such as the vice sect leaders and consecrated elders, implicitly nodded their heads in Han Li's direction, showing their acknowledgement of his arrival without making a move to approach him. Seeing that they did not make it uncomfortable for Han Li by making him greet them, Han Li had a good impression about these esteemed individuals. Because of Ma Rong's low status, he was unable to anything besides stand to the side with a look of concern. As the protectors tried to get closer to Han Li with their constant stream of pleasantries, Ma Rong's face revealed worry while both of his bands rubbed against each other non-stop. Finally, after Han Li finished greeting the last person, Ma Rong couldn't wait any longer and immediately rushed forward, grabbing Han Li's arm with one hand and charging straight into the house. This rude and impetuous action angered a few people who wished to get on good terms with medicinal god Han, revealing a bit of their displeasure. On the outside, Han Li had a forced smile, but he was actually quite pleased with Ma Rong's decision. This way, he could finally get rid of those incessantly annoying people without having to offend anyone. With a sense of urgency, Han Li was pulled into living room by Ma Rong. There were not very many people inside, except a few family members and two elders. Sect leader Ma was also there, but what surprised Han Li the most was that Li Feiyu was also inside the room. Han Li was shocked. According to what he knew, there was no relationship between Li Feiyu and Elder Li, so why did he showed here? Just as his stomach was about to burst with questions, Han Li noticed that senior disciple Li was comforting a petite girl with tears flowing down her face. Li Feiyu's highly focused expression was laced with traces of emotion, a look that was very different from the one he usually showed to his fellow disciples. Looking at Li Feiyu's enamored appearance, Han Li suddenly realized what was going on. Startled, he couldn't help but think that it was extremely funny. Han Li promptly and carefully scrutinized the young lady's appearance, wanting to see just what kind of beauty could make Li Feiyu disregard everything for the sake of love. The young lady looked to be around 15 to 16 years of age and was wearing a jasper hairpin. In addition, she wore a lotus green dress, giving the originally sweet and pleasant facial features a naughty and mischievous air. Despite of this, her two eyes were swollen red, making her seem lovely yet pathetic. Her dejected appearance gave people an urge to lovingly bring her into a hugging embrace. "Ziz, she really is one fair young lady," Han Li exclaimed for several moments in his heart, thinking that Li Feiyu falling under this lady's love snare was pardonable. In his heart, there was still a trace of envy and jealousy, not knowing when he himself would also be able to have an intimate companion. Maybe it was because he realized that Han Li was studying this young lady. But Ma Rong was quick to introduce everyone within the house to Han Li in order for him to establish a sense of familiarity. Sect leader Ma and a white-faced elder Qian, whom Han Li had saw before naturally, did not need any introductions, and he immediately took the initiative to step forward to check the body. "Greetings, sect leader Ma, elder Qian." "He, the young Dr. Han has arrived." Sect leader Ma acted as if he were Han Li's close friend, almost as if there was no difference between their status. "Dr. Han is Dr. Han. Why do you have to mention the word young?" Han Li silently cursed within his heart in disagreement with sect leader Ma's phrase. On the other hand, Elder Qian's attitude was cold and detached. He merely nodded his head, acting in complete opposite to sect leader Ma. Han Li was not offended by Elder Qian's indifference, since he knew that Elder Qian practiced a special cultivation method that required him to sever his feelings and desires, causing him to treat everyone with the same cold and indifferent attitude. In addition to sect leader Ma and Elder Qian, there was another tall, sturdy, and red-faced elder with whom Han Li wasn't familiar with. This elder's palms were rough and coarse, and all 10 of his short fingers were thick and solid. From this, it was evident from a single glance that this elder trained in a special martial art. "This is Elder Zhao, my master's close friend. His previously job was to supervise the treasure-gathering division outside the mountain. He just came back 2 days ago," Ma Rong said while introducing the elder to Han Li. Towards Han Li, Elder Zhao was neither cold nor warm. He made an N sound with his nose, not saying a word, but the doubt in his eyes was evident. He clearly didn't trust the invited medicinal god Han's skills due to his young age. Since Elder Zhao didn't seem to have a favorable attitude towards him, Han Li would naturally not take the initiative to fawn over Elder Zhao. Following Elder Zhao's example, Han Li used a flat tone to give his respects, then tried his best to avoid the other person. TL, the original raw Chinese was, attach himself onto the other person's hot buttock. A message from the author of A Record of a Mortal's Journey to Immortality. Tomorrow I will bring myself together and amend all the unreasonable areas the readers have brought to my attention, so I can only release 1 chapter today. I hope that the readers will forgive me. I will strive to make this book even more amazing than it currently is. Thank you all for your patience. Chapter 70, Instigation. It was obvious that sect leader Ma sensed the pair's animosity. Not only was he not worried, his face revealed a hint of a cheerful look. Even though young Dr. Han is of a young age, his medicinal skills can be said to have reached perfection. I believe that under Dr. Han's care, Elder Li can rise from the brink of death, he suddenly said, praising Han Li's medicinal abilities. Really? With him being so young, is his medicinal expertise that exceptional? Well, I don't really believe you. Don't tell me that his medicinal knowledge is even better than Dr. Mo's medicinal knowledge." After hearing these words, a few family members became at a loss, unsure of what to do. They didn't want to place Elder Li's fate in Han Li's hands, nor did they even hope that this little medicinal god could cure the poison and save his life. To open their mouths to refute Elder Zhao's words also did not seem appropriate. The party in question was Elder Li's friend, and also an elder in the Seven Mysteries Sect. Elder Zhao is not aware that little Dr. Han is Dr. Mo's proud disciple, and his medicinal expertise already far surpasses that of Dr. Mo. Vice sect leader secretly smirked, adding firewood to the fire. Even if this little boy of about years of age started learning when he was still in his mother's womb, how exceptional can his medicinal expertise be? "I still won't believe you unless I personally see it with my own eyes," said Elder Zhao, shaking his head like a palm leaf fan. He was still unwilling to directly criticize Han Li, and thus fall under Vice Sect leader's trap by offending someone whom he shouldn't have offended. Elder Zhao might have seemed like a rude and impetuous individual, but regardless of his attitude, he was not a fool who would rashly insult another member of the sect without confirming the identity of the person he was judging. After all, he had been able to hold the high status of an elder and maintain this position. In response, Han Li rolled his eyes, thinking to himself, "Why do I need to prove to you whether my medical skills are good enough?" He knew that sect leader Ma intentionally drew out this response, but Han Li still felt a bit depressed. It was very apparent that this Elder Zhao and sect leader Ma were not of the same faction, and even had a bit of a hostile relationship. The mixed circular palm that Elder Zhao practices in has been trained to perfection. "Its might is boundless," sect leader Ma said. Seeing Han Li look displeased with Elder Zhao, sect leader Ma felt the joy within his heart become even stronger, making him uncontrollably cry out random and strange phrases. How can it compare to sect leader Ma's highly polished mysterious yin finger? It seemed that Elder Zhao did not care for the other's identity as a vice sect master. Deadpanned and with no traces of politeness, Vice Sect Master Ma retaliated with a phrase of his own. "Haha, Elder Zhao has wrongly praised me." It was evident that sect leader Ma a type of person who hid knives within their smiles. He did not really mind Elder Zhao's sarcastic tone, smiling as he calmly received the other's false compliment. This was not the first time Elder Zhao had faced this type of situation, nor could he do anything about it. He could only shut his mouth, unwilling to nag with his thick-skinned opponent. He inwardly felt that there was something he couldn't wrap his mind around concerning the other's words. Even though sect leader Ma was not in the same faction as Elder Zhao, this was the first time they had revealed the conflicts of the upper echelon in front of so many juniors. It was unknown whether there were any tricks involved. As he listened to the two opposing parties exchanging harsh words, Han Li's expression did not change in the least as he pretended to be ignorant and unknowing of everything. But within his heart, he knew that sect leader Ma was once again trying to instigate a rift in the relationship between Han Li and Elder Zhao. Sect leader Ma had been indirectly attacking his opponents with words ever since he met Han Li, trying to rope this highly skilled medicinal god into his faction, thus expanding his influence. However, Han Li had never even considered joining the Seven Mysteries Sect's internal struggle for power. It was not because he was intentionally aloof from political and material pursuits or that he was arrogant, but because ever since he came into contact with Dr. Mo, Yu Zhidong, and similar people of high status, his aspirations were a lot higher, especially since he learned two different types of spells. He already viewed the Seven Mysteries Sect's internal struggle with minimal importance. Although Han Li was not weak, he did not want to offend those of a higher status. It was for this reason that he chose to avoid giving a clear reply, neither accepting nor declining the invitations from the upper echelon. Just like that, it was sect leader Ma's turn to have endless headaches. Even though Han Li's profound medicinal skills made it so that he could act stubbornly, Han Li was dragging out his response for too long of a period, making sect leader Ma extremely frustrated. To this day, Han Li had still refused to join his faction, nor had he given a direct answer. But in order to prevent Han Li from entering other factions, sect leader Ma had to do his best to ruin the relationship between Han Li and the other upper echelon members, inciting disharmony. Whether these childish tactics were effective or not, Han Li did not know, but up until today it was the first time that an upper-level faction had annoyed him greatly. Right now, sect leader Ma was doing his best to undermine Han Li's opinion of Elder Zhao, presumably wanting him to have no good memories of this elder. Ma Rong, noticing the start of a C\CK fight, felt a bit of panic within his heart and hurriedly continued his introductions. This is my master's wife, Li Shi. He began by pointing at a middle-aged woman who had some resemblance to the young lady. This is. The young lady by Li Feiyu's side was introduced last. Her name was Zhang Ziyu. Unexpectedly, she was Elder Li's niece. When he introduced Li Feiyu, the other intentionally pretended to not recognize Han Li, revealing a cool, unapproachable appearance. This made Ma Rong, who had initiated the introductions himself, feel awkward. He hurriedly whispered an explanation to Han Li, saying, "Protector Li has always been like this. This is his normal temperament and is not specifically directed at you, Dr. Han, so please do not take this personally." Han Li smiled slightly, knowing that Li Feiyu did not want to reveal their relationship in front of so many people. His demeanor means nothing to me. I would not lower myself by begging for attention from other people. Right now, it is better to look at Elder Li's condition than to waste time by arguing. Saving lives is more important. Han Li intentionally made a dismissive comment toward Li Feiyu. Ma Rong, upon hearing this, put his heart at ease and invited everybody into the bedroom of the sick patient. After hearing Han Li's statement, Li Feiyu's lips twitched a bit, appearing nonchalant. When everyone turned their bodies, he suddenly made a funny face towards Han Li's direction, then quickly returned to his normal appearance, making it seem as if nothing had happened. Han Li strongly resisted his urge to smile. Soon after, he closely followed senior disciple Li's footsteps, coming up to the front of Elder Li's bed. Upon seeing the facial features of the person on the bed, the normally bold Han Li couldn't help but suck in a cold breath. Now he finally understood why the other doctors were not willing to prescribe medicine. Right now, the originally benign-faced senior Elder Li remained unconscious, but there were spots of poison, the size of copper coins, extending from his face to his neck region and from his hands to his legs. Each spot of poison appeared to be different from the others because they varied in a plethora of abnormally bright colors. Everyone who saw them became visibly apprehensive. What was even more problematic for Han Li was that Elder Li's lips were greenish-black, and his facial features were enshrouded in a layer of dark air. This meant that the poison was in its late stages, thus making the complex task of saving Elder Li's small life more difficult. Chapter 71, Pure Spirit Powder. Han Li locked his eyebrows and remained quiet. He had just finished taking Elder Li's pulse and examining his tongue and pupils. He made a cursory decision that this poison was a blend of different poisons, the same as the aromatic coiling silk he had used before. Han Li didn't have the ability to remove the poison by targeting one type of poison at a time. He could only try to use the pure spirit powder and other unorthodox methods. Thinking about this, Han Li secretly cursed the other doctors who didn't have the courage to remove the poison and pretended to look like they were investigating, thus leaving him with this difficult problem. After a moment, Elder Zhao could not hold back anymore and asked, "You small child, can you save Elder Li or not? Say something." "Elder Zhao, you are too impatient. Can't you see that Dr. Han is trying to think of a solution? Be more patient." Before Han Li answered, sect leader Ma, who was standing nearby, once again pretended to be Han Li's ally and taunted Elder Zhao. Elder Zhao stared and opened his mouth as if to say something, but Han Li didn't wait for him to start talking. He gave a slight cough, halting further conversation. Han Li's cough raised a surprised look from the people inside the house. At this moment, Han Li remembered that he was only slightly over 10 years old, but he, albeit somewhat comically, coughed like an old man. The irony of the situation, however, didn't matter. He had completed his goal and didn't want to listen to the pair's argument anymore. "This is a blend of different poison, which makes it very troublesome to remove. I can't promise that I can completely remove this poison, but I can try. The process of removing the poison is risky, and it may even hasten Elder Li's death. Do you still want me to proceed?" Han Li pretended to be awkward and finished his statement. For him, it was better to not take the effort to remove the poison, seeing that his chances of succeeding were not very favorable. Han Li's words made the family members look at each other. No one dared to agree and let him immediately start removing the poison, but they knew that other than Han Li, no other doctor would be capable of curing Elder Li. After a while, Elder Li's wife, Lady Li, suddenly asked, "Dr. Han, what is your rate of success for saving my husband?" 50%, Han Li said without hesitating. "Very well. Dr. Han, please do your best to save him. If anything happens to my husband, it will be because of the will of heaven. I will never resent you, Dr. Han." Lady Li showed no hesitation, making up her mind so decisively in a manner that Han Li didn't expect. "Sister, you're not going to reconsider. I think it's incredibly risky considering that this doctor is very young." Elder Zhao grew slightly anxious and wanted to dissuade Lady Li from being overly impulsive. "I've considered it thoroughly. If Dr. Han doesn't remove the poison, my husband will not live past tonight. Why not take the risk and try even if there's only a 50% chance of success?" Lady Li put her head down and said softly. This, Elder Zhao could not reply with even a single word. Han Li briefly glanced at the other individuals, and seeing how they did not oppose Lady Li's decision, he removed a green porcelain bottle from his medicinal bag. From within the bottle, he took out a red medicinal pill. "Someone bring a bowl of warm water, dissolve this pill within the water, and have Elder Li drink it." "I'll go," a clear and melodious voice rang out before Han Li finished speaking. Right after answering, the red-eyed Zhang Ziyu, who had been previously standing to the side, started walking out. Li Feiyu stared distractedly before following her out. This caused Han Li to not help but feel unbridled disdain towards Li Feiyu. A moment later, Zhang Ziyu walked in with a helpless face, both hands empty. Li Feiyu followed closely behind, carefully holding a small white porcelain bowl. The crowd within the room, upon watching this scene, couldn't help but feel a bit of a smile within their hearts. Their faces revealed the happiness of watching a good show, making Zhang Ziyu's face blush and give forth a rosy red halo. Her hands rubbed against each other, revealing the appearance of a helpless and humble daughter. Zhang Ziyu's reactions lowered the nervous atmosphere in the room, easing the tension within their hearts. Li Feiyu straightforwardly gave the bowl to Lady Li. "Dr. Han, please verify whether this bowl of water will suffice." Lady Li turned her head to ask for Han Li's opinion. "It will do." Han Li swept his eyes over the white bowl. He then took the bowl with a single hand and threw the medicinal pill into the water. In a blink of an eye, the entire bowl of water was dyed with a red color. "Have Elder Li drink this immediately. Women are more careful, so it will be better if you accept the task." Han Li stretched out his hand and the bowl towards Lady Li. Lady Li hurriedly agreed, not daring to decline Han Li's request. To her, every single one of Han Li's words affect her husband's life, so how could she not listen attentively? "Just what is this medicine?" the wide-eyed Elder Zhao asked with trepidation, voicing the question everyone in the room wanted to know as he looked at Lady Li pour the big bowl of medicinal water into Elder Li's mouth. "This is a type of antidote that I personally concocted. Hopefully, it will be effective against the poison within Elder Li's body," answered Han Li, downplaying his profound medicine. He did not want other people to know of the pure spirit powder's existence. It would be better for him to keep a low profile so that this spiritual elixir would not bring him a headache. After the time it takes to eat a meal, the veil of dark air covering Elder Li's face began to recede, gradually turning light. The spots of poison on his body turned from dark to light and started to shrink. With these obvious changes, even an outsider would be able to tell that the poison in Elder Li's body was progressively being eliminated, pushing Elder Li on the path of recovery. After seeing this, the people within this room couldn't help but feel their faces beam with happiness as they looked at Han Li in a whole new light. Only Elder Zhao was unable to completely wipe away his view towards Han Li, using his nose to make a soft, hang noise, but his expression had softened quite a bit. Seeing how he had not taken any other steps to alleviate the poison, and yet it was already vanishing, even Han Li was startled. The effectiveness of the pure spirit powder completely exceeded his expectations. His next thought was that perhaps the poison afflicting Elder Li had not been as impressive as he thought it was. Seeing these positive developments, Han Li had some concerns, and there were two reasons why. The first reason was that he had just said that the process of counteracting the poison would contain some risks, but the poison ended up easily dispelled. The others might think that he had intentionally tricked them. Wouldn't that be the same as slapping himself on the face? Secondly, if the pure spirit powder was so effective in dispelling poison, how come it couldn't treat the poison within his own body? This made him feel even more anger and concern regarding the poison within his body. Chapter 72, Removing Poison. Han Li secretly cursed, but he silently maintained the smile on his face. In order to maintain his image as a medicinal god, he had to act as if he had planned everything in advance. Han Li's calm appearance helped him deceive those who were present, letting them believe that the efficiency of the medicinal pill was within his expectations and making them feel more admiration towards him. Sect leader Ma smiled very cheerfully and lightheartedly, showing a sense of pride as if Han Li was already his subordinate. He was currently the one who was the most likely to gain Han Li's support, and as a result, he laughed as joyously and freely as he did. But not long after, the situation took a drastic change. "Not good," Xianxia cried out in fear. "The black air on Uncle's face is resurfacing." These words caused everyone to become startled. A few of them gathered impulsively around Elder Li to take a closer look at him. Elder Zhao was among them. Upon hearing Zhang Ziyu, Han Li felt his heart pause momentarily, but he did not immediately join the crowd. Instead, he stiffly moved closer to the front of the bed. Lady Li was a meticulous lady with a sharp perception, and she hurriedly called out for 2 juniors to move away from the bed and make room for medicinal god Han so that he could make a diagnosis. Han Li, seeing that there was a space near the bedside, calmly walked up to carefully investigate the situation. Approximately after the length of time for half a stick of incense to burn, Han Li was positive that the poison had not been completely removed, leaving behind a faint and indistinct black air on Elder Li's face. Having reached the final verdict, Han Li slightly turned his head to glance at Zhang Ziyu, thinking that this young lady had made a fuss over nothing. Han Li's gaze contains a bit of disapproval that was discovered by Li Feiyu, who had been constantly staring at Zhang Ziyu. He returned Han Li's glance, unwilling to allow Han Li to offend the goddess of his heart. Han Li was speechless. It seemed that once Li Feiyu fell to the snares of love, he would value his beloved over his friends. Han Li returned his composure and continued to scrutinize Elder Li's condition, refusing to be nagged by a simpleton of a man who had been easily swayed by a woman. Aside from the remaining black air on Elder Li's face, the spots of poison on his body, upon reaching the size of a soybean, maintained their size instead of continuing to grow even smaller. Due to the remaining poison in his body, Elder Li still remained unconscious. Seeing the current situation, Han Li knew that he might finally be able to use his backup plan and not have to worry about the lies he told. It was just the right time to demonstrate his own foresight. "Fetch a basin full of clear water," Han Li said with an unquestionable tone. This time, the task did not fall upon Zhang Ziyu. Ma Rong rushed out before anyone could respond. Han Li turned around and solemnly said to Elder Qian and sect leader Ma, "Next, I will need 2 people to help me, using their inner strength to force the poison within Elder Li's body to move towards a few key acupoints. I will then use an acupuncture needle technique to release the blood and detoxify the poison, forcing the poison out of his body. You 2 will be able to handle it." Sect leader Ma's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but he still agreed. Elder Qian, on the other hand, coldly nodded his head and agreed in a straightforward manner. "Why do you have to specifically use those 2 people? Am I not qualified to help?" Elder Zhao asked unhappily, believing that Han Li had underestimated him. Han Li silently sighed, knowing that he had to clearly explain to this obstinate man. The mixed circular hand that Elder Zhao practices should be based on external martial art techniques. Thus, regarding the purity of inner strength, I believe that sect leader Ma and Elder Qian are much more suitable," Han Li said in a patient, warm tone. Towards Han Li's tactful reply, Elder Zhao was at a loss for words. Han Li no longer felt any resentment towards this buffoon, and spoke to the rest of the people in the room with a commanding tone. "Aside from sect leader Ma and Elder Qian, everyone please step outside for now. The method to remove the poison from Elder Li is not suitable for people to watch. It requires absolute silence, so we must not be disturbed by others." Once Han Li finished speaking, his words made the people in the room feel foolish. Lady Li was the first to understand as she respectfully said a single phrase, "I leave my husband in your care." She was the first to discreetly leave the room. With Lady Li as an example, the others, regardless of whether they were willing or not, could only return one by one back to the living room. After Ma Rong brought back a basin of clear water, Han Li immediately hurried him out and tightly closed the doorroom, leaving a crowd of confused people looking at each other in dismay outside the room. A quarter of an hour passed by, but the door had yet to open, even though the only obstacle separating the crowd from the interior of the room was a door. Not even a single sound was heard from within. This peculiar silence caused the crowd of people, who was waiting for news to be irritable and restless. A trace of a shadow wordlessly crept into everyone's hearts. Even Lady Li, who initially appeared to be calm, had some hints of restlessness, not to mention the fiery-tempered elder Zhao, who had paced the living room back and forth countless of times. Just when the people in the living room had completely lost all their patience, the room door opened with a ga-zhai sound. The crowd reflexively shifted their gaze for a moment, converging their eyes at the same place. The atmosphere immediately became heavy while containing a bit of anxiety. Han Li calmly walked out. His weariness was evident on his face, but when he saw the crowd of people and their intense stares, he revealed a small smile. Everything's fine now. The remainder of the poison has been completely removed, and after a good night's rest, Elder Li will regain consciousness sometime tomorrow. Han Li said these words with great confidence. In reality, he himself did not think that the removal of the poison would proceed so smoothly with not even the slightest complication. After hearing these words, Lady Li and the others revealed a smile one by one, their originally depressing attitudes completely swept away. Several impulsive people wanted to barge in and take a look, but Han Li stretched out a hand and stopped them all. Elder Li's body is currently very weak, and it is best that avoid too many people or loud noises to expedite the expulsion of the poison. Sect leader Ma and Elder Qian have expended a great deal of inner strength and are currently readjusting their breathing. I think that the less people enter, the better. The best-case scenario would be if Lady Li were the only one who could enter, Han Li told Lady Li solemnly. After hearing these news, Lady Li could not possibly have any other thought. She swiftly nodded her head and could not help but express her thanks to Han Li. She soon rushed into the room by herself in order to see her husband with her own eyes. Chapter 73, Li Feiyu's Thoughts. Upon entering the house, Lady Li smelled a strong odor and saw sect leader Ma and Elder Qian sitting cross-legged in front of the bed with their eyes closed, and in the process of harmonizing their breathing. In the space between the two people, a basin of black blood emitted a horrid stench. According to Han Li, their faces were a bit pale due to the large amount of energy that they had expended for the sake of treating Elder Li. Lady Li's heart was suddenly filled with gratitude towards the two men. Although she did not know any martial arts from what she had just seen and heard, she knew better than to bother the two people and quickly slowed down her steps, lightly approaching the front of the bed and looking towards the person lying in the bed sheets. She only saw Elder Li sleeping soundly on the bed. The painful look between his brows had completely disappeared, although his face still looked greenish-yellow. The black chi was gone, and the poison spots on the body also disappeared, leaving behind tiny scars that were nearly invisible to the human eye. Seeing that the poison had almost been completely removed, Lady Li couldn't help but cry out in joy. A moment later, she wiped away the tears from the corner of her eyes. She remembered that she should go back and thank Han Li again, and thus she promptly gathered herself and quietly walked back to the living room. Once she stepped out of Elder Li's room, she was immediately surrounded by people who assaulted her with rounds of questions that never ended, so she did not have the chance to see Han Li. She couldn't help but be surprised at the fact that Han Li was absent, so she hurriedly asked Ma Rong and the other people where he had gone. After listening to their reply, Lady Li realized that Han Li had prescribed a rejuvenating drug before leaving, nimbly excusing himself, not staying a moment longer. After hearing this, Lady Li was speechless for quite a while, but within her heart she had already made a firm decision. She decided that once Elder Li's body recovered, the couple, husband and wife, must personally pay a visit to Han Li and give a large sum of money in thanks for saving Elder Li's life. Lady Li did not notice that within the room, aside from medicinal god Han Li, there was another person missing. Li Feiyu had left instead of staying around Zhang Ziyu like a constant shadow. On the side of some obscure small road, Han Li, who had recently left Elder Li's house, was laying on the grass with his hands under his head, relaxing under a lush and dense tree. Just when he had finished counting to 1,000, a black shadow suddenly pounced on his body. He became very aggressive, as if he was deeply annoyed by the disturbance. "Hey, stop messing around. How come every time we meet you always try to jump me? I'm not Zhang Ziyu." After Han Li finished speaking, the black shadow nimbly turned around in midair, landing on Han Li's side as light as a feather. His posture was elegant to the extreme. It was precisely Li Feiyu who had followed him. "Han Li, wouldn't that dark and swarthy appearance of yours be completely shamed when compared to Lady Zhang Ziyu?" After hearing his words, Li Feiyu was irritated. and gently lifted his right toe to poke at Han Li's buttocks in a reprimanding manner. Hearing his response, Han Li rolled his eyes and smoothly stood up. It seems that our senior disciple Li values his beloved over his friends. I truly am not prudent when it comes to making friends. Stop speaking nonsense. What did you call me out for? You have to know that I finally found a rare opportunity to get close to Zhang Ziyu, but I'm wasting it by meeting with you. If you can't say something worthwhile, then don't think you'll be able to get away with it. Li Feiyu appeared to be distraught and deeply angered by Han Li because he was randomly called out. Did I call you out? How come even I did not know of it? Did I personally say it? Han Li intentionally pretended to be shocked by exaggerating his surprise. When you came out of the room, you winked at me. Only a blind man wouldn't have seen it. Stop beating around the bush. If you have nothing to say, then I truly must return. Li Feiyu turned around if he wanted to leave, preventing Han Li from being able to tell whether or not his attitude was a bluff. Han Li did not plan to continue teasing his friend. His expression suddenly changed as he sternly told Li Feiyu, "Don't blame me for being meddlesome. As your friend, I want to confirm something. Does Zhang Ziyu know that you are taking the essence extraction pill and that you only have a few years left to live?" Upon hearing these words, Li Feiyu turned silent. His face became deadly pale, without a visible hint of blood. Han Li sighed softly, knowing that he did not need to ask any further. The answer was evident in Li Feiyu's expression alone. "Why must you always interfere with my affairs?" Li Feiyu's expression was extremely sorrowful, finally speaking after a long, agonizing pause. Han Li did not reply to Li Feiyu's question. Instead, he softly patted the other's shoulder, trying to console him. "You must have heard before that if you invest too much in this kind of relationship, your sorrows will only grow." Han Li finally spoke what was on his mind after Li Feiyu had somewhat calmed down. He phrased this with a wise tone, making Li Feiyu pause for a moment. "I'm trying to pull you out of the trap before you fall too deep so that you will suffer less pain in the future," Han Li warmly said, supplementing his words. Li Feiyu looked at Han Li with a strange look in his eyes. "What, do you have a problem?" asked Han Li. He was disturbed by Li Feiyu's gaze and hurriedly looked at him up and down. "You little brat, how old are you that you can speak this way? Why do you speak as if you were an old, rosy hand when it comes to relationships? Don't tell me that you have already experienced the love of a woman." Li Feiyu suddenly opened his mouth to ask. "Of course not, these words come from reading books. I think they are very reasonable, so I use them to explain things to you." "Oh, so it's like that, I say. How can a presentable man with an unrestrained and natural appearance like me know less about matters of the heart? Do I need your lengthy criticism? Our relationship exists only in my mind." Li Feiyu released a lengthy sigh, continuously patting his own chest as if he had received a big scare. Han Li was speechless. Wasn't this fool's recovery way too quick? He was just talking about living and dying, and in the blink of an eye, he was once again laughing like an idiot, still an emotional person. But Han Li was stubborn as a mule and asked, "Are you really giving up on Zhang Ziyu? You won't take action when you see her in another's embrace?" Li Feiyu's giddy appearance immediately turned extremely cold. Filled with killing intent, he declared, "I will chop off the hand of anyone who dares to touch Zhang Ziyu. I don't care about the things that happen after I die, but as long as I'm alive, Lady Zhang Ziyu belongs to me." The tone of his words could turn anyone into solid ice. Chapter 74, Imperial Flight Technique. Chapter 74, Imperial Flight Technique. Han Li looked at Li Feiyu's domineering face with respect and remained silent, not knowing what to say. Suddenly, Li Feiyu's imposing air was abruptly retracted, returning him back to his jovial self. He suddenly winked his eye at Han Li and loudly said, "What do you think? Wasn't my imposing air realistic? Wasn't it overflowing with such an air of dominance, a formidable quality, that it made you admire me to the point of prostrating yourself in admiration, immediately resolving your heart to vow your loyalty and devotion to me?" Hearing these arrogant words, Han Li couldn't help but laugh bitterly because he was actually moved by the Li Feiyu's resolute words. However, Li Feiyu's last words immediately reverted him to his true colors. Han Li harshly stared at him for a short moment and gnashed his teeth together before saying, "Formidable character. I see you're more like a coward." Li Feiyu did not mind this harsh criticism. Instead, he started laughing loudly in a very carefree manner, apparently very happy that he could manipulate Han Li in this way. However, Han Li slowly recovered his composure, and while Li Feiyu was still laughing, he indifferently said, I have already reminded about your predicament, which you clearly understood. Now, I will solemnly ask you once again, would you be willing to dispel your martial arts? If you do, I might still be able to prolong your life for a few more years, enabling you to live with Zhang Ziwa for a longer period of time. Will you truly not consider this option? Li Feiyu's laughter suddenly choked to a stop. His face deepened and his eyes fiercely pierced into Han Li, who closed his mouth. But Han Li's expression remained the same, and did not falter in returning his gaze. After the time it takes to brew a cup of tea, Li Feiyu retracted the penetrative gaze from his eyes. His complexion returned to a much better state. Han Li, I have already told you that I will definitely not consider voluntarily discarding my martial arts. I know that you are looking out for me, but don't mention this again, all right, he said with an unyielding attitude, his words containing a beseeching tone. Moreover, do you think that Zhang Ziwa will be able to look up to me if I became a mediocre person without the strength to even win against a chicken? Li Feiyu asked with a mocking tone. Han Li was speechless. He turned his head to one side, and his eyes followed the small road that Li Feiyu had come from. After calmly looking around for a moment, he opened his mouth to say, "Since you have already made your decision, then I will no longer try to persuade you otherwise. Hurry up, you should leave right now. Hopefully, you and Lady Zhang Ziwa can become a happy couple." At Han Li's words, Li Feiyu's face was immediately covered in a smile. He strongly patted Han Li's shoulder several times. "Good brother, these are the kinds of words that I love to hear. As of today, they are also the words that make me the happiest. I will be leaving first." With a few leaps, he disappeared down a small road, his silhouette vanishing without a trace. "Oh, how it aches!" Han Li quickly grabbed at his shoulder. Li Feiyu's multiple slaps had secretly contained inner strength, making his shoulder immediately swell until it looked like a small red bun. This time, his suffering was not small. This fool actually used inner strength to retaliate just because I poked at his sore spot, Han Li thought, grimacing in pain while fishing out a medicinal paste. He took off his upper garment to spread the paste across his shoulder to heal his injury. "Sigh, it is with great difficulty that I finally do a good deed, but this is how I end up. I really am not suited to doing good deeds. I should probably get back to comprehending my magic techniques. The next time I see him, I'll get my revenge for this incident," Han Li thought with a hint of annoyance. After a long stretch of time had passed, Han Li turned 18 years old. In this period of time, the Seven Mysteries Sect and the Feral Wolf Gang had continued fighting until they finally declared war on each other. Since then, several small skirmishes and big clashes had broken out at the border between the two powerhouses. All of the disciples, including Han Li, were affected by these battles, making Han Li feel endless sorrow and grief. The large clock outside the valley rang out more frequently than usual as a result of the increased number of injuries, giving Han Li the opportunity to practice quite a few difficult medicinal techniques, causing him to have great progress in his medicinal expertise. But even with Han Li's magical hands that seemed able to bring the dead back to life, there were still quite a few high-ranking sect members who had succumbed to their injuries. They either died in the battlefield or on the way back from the front lines, not even giving Han Li the slightest opportunity to save their lives. It was also because of this that both sides revealed their young prodigies, who assumed the positions of their fallen comrades. These talented youths included Wuxia Sanying Erbao from the Feral Wolf Gang and Jai Xuanxiang from the Seven Mysteries Sect. Li Feiyu was also included among these talented youths because he had personally beheaded Zai Yizhang, thus obtaining the revered position of division head of the External Blade Division. Li Feiyu could already be considered as a person of high authority. His relationship with Zhang Ziwa was also progressing rapidly, already to the point where marriage discussions were held. Aware of the upcoming marriage, Han Li could only sigh. Who could know whether what Li Feiyu was doing was right? After all, he was not Li Feiyu nor had Han Li walked in his shoes. Thus, Han Li was incapable of making a decision regarding Li Feiyu's course of actions. But thinking back, Han Li would not have had the courage to seek for his loved one's hand in marriage, while knowing that his death was imminent. As a result, Han Li could only pretend to be deaf and mute. He was aware that no matter how close he was to Li Feiyu, there were some lines he could not cross. Li Feiyu was his good friend, so of course Han Li had to be considerate of his choices. Additionally, an extremely important matter recently occurred, forcing him to divert a large portion of his attention. Through countless failures, Han Li finally learned how to use the Imperial Flight technique. The Imperial Flight technique was similar to Heaven's Eye technique. Both of them were supplementary techniques and could only be performed on one's own body instead of on others. However, its practical use was better than Heaven's Eye technique by a substantial amount. After using Imperial Flight technique, Han Li felt his body become as light as a swallow. Just by lightly tapping his toe on the ground, he was able to flash by several tens of feet without expending the slightest effort. In addition, the high-speed sensation of rushing through the air was so addicting that Han Li would wildly run around the valley 5 or 6 times on a daily basis. Aside from his small addiction, he became an expert of Qinggong. Qinggong is a Chinese martial arts technique that involves running up a plank supported against a wall. In wuxia, the practitioner is eventually able to walk over water and travel as light as a feather, etc. For more information, here is a Wikipedia link. https://n wikipedia.org/wiki/Qinggong. Of course, this acceleration was different from acceleration achieved by using the technique shifting smoke steps. Shifting smoke steps was the sect's secret technique that made the impossible possible by using a copious amount of power to increase speed within a short distance. This kind of movement technique could only reveal its greatest potential in narrow spaces. In contrast, Imperial Flight technique gradually used magic power in small amounts throughout its execution, minimizing the burden on the body. Han Li was capable of running wildly at will, without developing any of the symptoms that were normally exhibited when the body was undergoing extreme stress. Moreover, this technique would continue until he ran out of magic power, or until he willingly stopped supplying magic power. As a result, Imperial Flight technique was an essential technique, commonly used by low-level cultivators while traveling across the land. Chapter 75, Using Magic Techniques. Chapter 75, Using Magic Techniques. Since mastering the Imperial Flight technique, Han Li had become even more intrigued by the potential of the other two magic techniques, Soul Lock Talisman and Telekinesis Technique. So he spent large amounts of time and energy, hoping that one day he could make a sudden breakthrough like he did with the Imperial Flight technique and gain a flash of insight. But after spending some time on valuable research, Han Li discovered that he was unable to use these two techniques. It wasn't because of an inherent defect in Han Li's constitution, but rather because his body wasn't strong enough for either technique. As described in the book, the Soul Lock Talisman was a type of charm that one had to prepare beforehand. Han Li used yellow paper that he bought from a nearby small town and followed the book's instructions, drawing the pattern with a writing brush. Even though the book did not describe what materials should be used to create the talisman, he kept thinking back to Dr. Mo's silver-colored talisman. He naturally adopted the use of this precious and luxurious silver powder. Whether this material was effective or not, Han Li did not know, but his homemade talisman soon looked exactly like the illustrations found in the book. What a shame! Even though the talisman's appearance was identical, it was still not enough. Whenever Han Li performed the activation incantation, the writing on the magical talisman would not emit a dazzling silvery light that had appeared back when Dr. Mo used the Soul Lock Talisman. Nothing strange or out of the ordinary occurred either. It was an utter failure, causing him to fall into a predicament with no room for improving it. He didn't know whether his failure was due to an error in chanting the incantation, his inability to grasp how to do it, or a mistake in creating the talisman. But after a more recent investigation, a different result was revealed. After an intensive series of studies about materials, folklore, and magic techniques, Han Li finally discovered that the talismans used by cultivators were not objects that ordinary mortals would recognize. They were not made of ordinary papers and materials, but rather materials that only cultivators would know how to process into talismans. These materials could only be found in special areas accessible only to cultivators. Because of this, even though he had performed the incantation gesture perfectly, he never succeeded. Telekinesis technique also followed the same logic. Han Li used to believe that he could cast the telekinesis technique on whatever item he casually picked. He practiced on common household items, such as knives, blades, etc., but failed in every attempt. But now that Han Li was more informed, he finally understood that the telekinesis technique could only control objects that had been specially crafted for cultivators. It would not work on ordinary items. As a result, Han Li took the weird and bizarre items he gained from Dr. Mo, including the soul-luring clock and the 7 silver knives used in the 7 soul-devouring technique, and used them as a medium for the telekinesis technique. After some experimenting, however, not a single item could be used to perform the technique. This made Han Li be extremely disappointed. None of these items could be used with the telekinesis technique. He had no choice but to stop until he found a suitable object. TL, the soul-luring watch, is the watch that Han Li and Dr. Mo used to control Crooked's soul. Since he knew that his problem was a lack of suitable objects for the soul lock talisman and the telekinesis technique, Han Li could only shift his attention elsewhere. He intended to take the other secret martial arts skills and magic techniques in order to combine them and increase his own strength, raising him to new levels in a relatively short period of time. After entertaining this wild fantasy, Han Li once again resumed his bitter and difficult training. He quickly completed several small achievements. After several attempts, he successfully fused together the shifting smoke steps technique and the imperial flight technique. Although he thought of it as a fusion, it was actually just imperial flight technique followed by shifting smoke steps. The harmony and compatibility of the two techniques had to be carefully controlled. Otherwise, mistakes would easily occur. For this reason, Han Li devoted quite a bit of energy and attention to these aspects. But just with this, he was able to remove the disadvantages of the imperial flight technique and the heavy energy consumption of the shifting smoke steps, gradually perfecting both techniques. He appeared as a mixture of lightning and fire whenever he unpredictably shifted to the next location, appearing and disappearing in different spots. Not long after, Han Li also gained a novel insight on a different application of the fireball technique. Normally, the user would use their own magic to launch the small fireball towards the enemy. Although this was the technique's original function, Han Li thought that this was not the technique's limit. A movement expert would be able to easily avoid the small fireball, which depended on one's magic power to fly slowly, thus restricting Han Li's ability to fight at close quarters against the cultivators of Jianghu. He might as well use only half of the energy he originally needed to cast the flashy fireball technique. When the fireball appeared, instead of shooting it out directly, he would first control it with his hands like a small blade, taking advantage of its destructive, unstoppable power. Han Li was confident that he could easily kill any skilled opponent with his heavily modified technique. With his new trump cards to rely on, Han Li could finally relax, no longer having to worry about his own ability. He could finally be confident enough to travel to the Land Province to get the antidote for the poison within Han Li's body. TL, Land Province was Dr. Mo's previous home, although this is the first time that it was mentioned by name. In addition to perfecting his techniques, Han Li had been treating precious herbs as if they were snacks, eating them to break through to the 8th layer of the eternal spring arts, and thus allowing his magic power to greatly increase. Simply based on the current density of his magic power, Han Li surpassed Yu Zhidong in his original corporeal form, but in terms of techniques, Han Li could not compare himself to him. Back when Yu Zhidong was cultivating in his clan, he had received pointers from his seniors and exchanged notes with his peers. He was much stronger than Han Li, half a bottle of vinegar. Han Li was not aware of this, but even if he were, he would not have been concerned. He was not arrogant enough to believe that learning one or two basic magic techniques would allow him to compete and stand on even ground with other cultivators. His current enemies were still the mortals of the secular world, not the cultivators of Jianghu. As a result, Han Li was not arrogant. Instead, he was merely enjoying his own success. Just as he was preparing to find an excuse to leave the Seven Mysteries Sect, the Feral Wolf Gang suddenly suggested holding peace talks. When the news spread, it caused the Seven Mysteries Sect to be in an uproar. In recent battles, it had been the Feral Wolf Gang who had the upper hand, constantly pressuring the Seven Mysteries Sect. Under such circumstances, why would the Feral Wolf Gang want to engage in peace talks? Was it possible that there was a hidden trick? This raised suspicions within several people. In a short period of time, calls for accepting and rejecting the peace talks rang out in succession within the Seven Mysteries Sect. All of the elite members had their own views. Li Feiyu was among those who stubbornly refused. Those who opposed the peace talks and those who supported the talks voiced their opinions in equal clamors. Neither side could come out from the argument as a clear winner. In the end, sect leader Wang had to put his foot down and make a decision. He declared that the Seven Mysteries Sect would hold the peace talks, and if the conditions weren't too ridiculous, then the two powerhouses would shake hands. If the conditions were too extravagant, they would continue fighting. Even though this kind of filthy decision was unable to satisfy either party, it was the only compromise available. The Seven Mysteries Sect was forced to proceed in this manner. TL, the original Chinese said, mixed in mud. Chapter 76, Negotiations and Eruption. Chapter 76, Negotiations and Eruption. After several discussions between the Seven Mysteries Sect and the Feral Wolf Gang, the two agreed to meet and discuss at a place called Falling Sand Slope, located between their two borders. As for the members of the delegate teams who will participate in the discussions, the Feral Wolf Gang adamantly proposed that both sides must have one figure of high authority as an expression of good faith. Otherwise, there was no need to hold this discussion. When this condition was brought forth, it did not cause an uproar within the Seven Mysteries Sect, since this was a very normal condition for negotiations. Of course, neither side was willing to send their highest-ranking elite to such a dangerous situation. The Seven Mysteries Sect would at most send out an auxiliary sect leader, while the Feral Wolf Gang would send out an auxiliary member of a similar status to maintain their reputation. Hence, this condition was not a problem. As a result, both sides agreed on a set date for the negotiations, and when that day came around, both groups sent out 100 or so members to join the meeting. In order to prepare for any possible ambush the Feral Wolf Gang may set during the negotiations, the members of the Seven Mysteries Sect participating in the negotiations had made a meticulous backup plan. In addition to the delegate team, which consisted of 5 members, the remaining 100 sect members formed a large squadron led by Vice-Sect leader Wu, the sect's second strongest member. The 100 sect members were all high-level experts within the sect. These members were all known protectors and were worshipped as core sect members. Among them included several elders, division heads, high-ranked members, and the like. A squadron formed by such esteemed members was truly worth of being considered a grand battle formation. With so many experts forming the procession, even if the Feral Wolf Gang's entire elite troops attacked at once, they would probably not be able to block the sect's advance. Each member of the Seven Mysteries Sect, from the highest to the lowest member, felt great deal of confidence. For this reason, if there was anything that hinted foul play, the negotiators could depend on these highly skilled martial artists to quickly kill their way out of the entrapment and return to their own territory, where there would be countless numbers of sect brothers responsible for receiving them, assuring them a safe retreat. Li Feiyu also volunteered to join. For him, who did not have much time to live, the more dangerous the place, the more his thirst would grow. Once the negotiation date approached, the procession that took up nearly half of the Seven Mysteries Sect's top experts set out on their journey. To them, this journey would take at least half a month's time and would be slow and arduous. Han Li did not hold this matter with much importance. Whether or not the negotiations succeeded did not matter to him. He was getting ready to leave this place for the outside world to temper himself, so what did the rise and fall of the Seven Mysteries Sect have to do with him? As long as they did not involve him, he too lazy to care about the matter. So during the days before the squadron would leave for the negotiation, he remained calm and leisurely about accelerating the growth of the medicinal herbs he might require in the future. Moreover, he started to collect a few precious seeds of herbs in preparation for future uses. And Li already decided that once the delegate team returned to the mountain, he would officially say his farewells to a few members of the sect. If the sect's elite members were unwilling to let him leave, he did not mind revealing a bit of his true power in front of them for them to witness his might and completely give up on holding him back. In reality, secretly leaving would be the most convenient option, but Han Li was worried that when they couldn't find him, they would cause trouble for his family. He decided that conspicuously bidding the sect's elite members farewell while revealing a bit of his power to intimidate them was necessary. As for his excuse for leaving, Han Li had already spent a long time thinking it through. All he needed to say was that he missed Dr. Mo and wanted to search for his master. As for whether the other believed him or not, Han Li did not care at all. With his power supporting him, how could he be worried about what they thought? Whenever Han Li thought of this, he couldn't help but lift the corner of his mouth and reveal a hint of a cold smile. The current Han Li could extinguish the lives of a few sect members if he wanted, and it would be as easy as turning a palm. Of course, these was all just thoughts. He would not do anything drastic like killing sect members. But Han Li would have never imagined that 4 nights after the negotiating team left, a shabbily dressed person with long and unruly hair and covered from head to toe in dust would suddenly barge into his house. His eyes completely bloodshot, and with white lips he hoarsely said to him a single breath, "The negotiation team is finished. Sect Master Wu, the protectors, the consecrated elders, they're all dead." Han Li was dumbstruck upon hearing this, but before he even opened his mouth to ask, "Do?" Suddenly from somewhere in the mountain range, a sharp and penetrating sentry warning rang through the air. Bang bang. It was followed by another wave of muffled sentry warnings. Dong dong. Ding ding. Peng peng. All sorts of warning sounds rang out in the same manner, followed closely by countless cries of battle rising and falling in succession throughout the mountain. Among the noise was the faint sounds of weapons clashing against each other. In that one moment, the entire mountain area, which had been covered with serene clouds tinged with sunset hues, became a giant battleground where members were massacred. Han Li's face changed. He was unable to continue listening to the man talking in front of him, and with a flash of his body, Han Li appeared outside of his residence. He quickly looked in all four directions, found the highest building, and slightly stamped his foot, his body appearing on top of the building. He then looked into the distance outside of the valley. His visage became very unsightly and gloomy. Not far within his vision, the mountain seemed to be filled with flames that reached the skies, people rushing around, and sword flashes gleaming nonstop. Moreover, there were sounds of close combat everywhere. The warning sounds that rang out merged with angry shouts in a frenzied mass of noise. Hearing the wind moving behind his back, he asked without turning his head, "Li Feiyu, is it the Feral Wolf Gang?" Yes, who would have thought that they had planned so meticulously? After practically annihilating the negotiation team, they immediately moved up the mountain to slaughter the remaining survivors. The dusty informant with long and unruly hair was precisely Li Feiyu, who had left 4 days prior. His current voice was dripping with pent-up rage, unwilling to accept the Feral Wolf Gang's actions. Chapter 77 Countermeasure. Chapter 77 Countermeasure. But what is strange is how they broke through the sentry outposts surrounding mountains. When we retreated back up the mountain, we clearly called out to the sentries to be on high alert, Li Feiyu said to himself, full of doubt. There is nothing strange about this. The Feral Wolf Gang already made plans for this massive assault a long time ago. Secretly inserting spies within the sentries is an easy matter. It would be normal for the undiscovered spies to silently take over the sentry posts, Han Li lightly said. But if the Feral Wolf Gang wanted to easily take over the different divisions, that would be impossible. I reckon that they plan to surround all the division halls on the mountain but not attack them. Then, they will gather all their experts to concentrate their attacks on the main division located at Setting Sun Summit. They only need to capture or kill the sect leader, and the rest will follow suit. So what should we do now? Should we go to Setting Sun Summit? Li Feiyu's questions impatiently followed one another. Han Li was speechless. After quite some time, he suddenly turned his body towards Li Feiyu and gravely said, "You still haven't told me something crucial. The negotiation team had so many highly skilled experts, so how could they be completely wiped out? Logically speaking, the Feral Wolf Gang shouldn't have that much strength." Upon hearing these words, Li Feiyu's facial muscles tensed for a moment, and he couldn't help but stick out his tongue to lick his cracked lips. Revealing a hint of a bitter, smiling expression, he said, "They fired large quantities of crossbows in rapid succession. These crossbows happened to be military grade." Military grade rapid-fire crossbows. That's correct. It was our second day since we left the mountain. We were walking in a field, and since we were still in our own territory, everyone was pretty relaxed. In that moment, countless Feral Wolf Gang members appeared from all sides, and in each of their hand was a stiff crossbow. Soon, the sky was covered by a rain of crossbow bolts. The sneak attack caused those disciples with lacking martial art skills to die on the spot amidst the chaotic rain of bolts. Only a few martial art experts or the extremely lucky ones were able to dodge this first wave, but many carried injuries, which weakened their martial arts skill by quite a bit. I'm also one of those who were lucky. Otherwise, I would not have made it back. Speaking up to this point, Li Feiyu still had some lingering fears, his eyes unconsciously revealing traces of dread. It seems like the image of a volley of crossbow bolts provoked quite a big reaction from Li Feiyu. After the volley of arrows, the others' experts appeared, and everyone took part in a bitter battle. The remainder of our forces decided break apart our formation, going in separate ways in order to increase our chances of survival. My luck was also good. In the enemy's eyes, I was not high on their kill list, so only a few people followed me, and their martial arts skills were not very profound, allowing me to slaughter my way out. But as I was rushing back, I discovered that the Feral Wolf Gang had overrun our checkpoints one by one in quick succession. They were waiting for those who escaped the ambush to walk into their trap. After falling for the trap 2 times, I no longer dared to go seek help. because I wanted to know about the situation of other sect members. I later steeled my resolve and straightforwardly ambushed a feral wolf gang law enforcer wearing blue clothes. From him, I found out that sect leader Wu and several other elders have all died in battle at the hands of the countless experts that surrounded them, leaving only those who fled like me, who was not considered neither too important nor too weak. After learning of this news, I did not dare to dally any longer and rushed back up the mountain with all the strength I could muster. Halfway up, I coincidentally met two other people who, like me, had managed to escape death. Together, we continued to escape for one day and one night, finally returning back to the mountain. Once we returned, the other two left for Setting Sun Summit to notify sect leader Wang that the negotiation team had been completely wiped out. I fabricated an excuse that I had to heal my wound and secretly came to meet with you in order to discuss our counterattack. Although sect leader Wu and countless others died during the ambush, a few disciples managed to escape. Our status within the sect is neither high nor low. Who knows if the higher-ups will be driven by fury and place all the blame on us, making us scapegoats. Even though I have not finished telling you everything, the feral wolf gang is slaughtering its way up the mountain. You must tell me what we should do right now. Li Feiyu said all this in a single breath with a helpless expression. Hearing this, Han Li wrinkled his eyebrow and tilted his head to think. At this moment, the sounds of slaughter became all the more intense, and from time to time, the mournful sound of people dying would ring out, making those who hear it do nothing but tremble. "Do you still have subordinates on the mountain?" Han Li asked, his voice becoming extremely solemn. "Yes, I still have 20-some subordinates located in several houses near Elder Li's residence. I originally planned to take them out to settle some matters after the negotiation team returned." "Okay then, we'll first go to Elder Li's residence to gather the others as well as to take the opportunity to meet up with Lady Zhang Ziwer and Elder Li. As for our next step, we will make a decision after we learn more about the situation," Han Li calmly said, appearing to be extremely rational. "All right, I'll listen to you. Right now it's chaos outside. I'm very worried about Ziwer," Li Feiyu exclaimed with a bit of worry. Han Li glanced at Li Feiyu, completely at a loss regarding his thoughts. On one hand, Li Feiyu was extremely worried about Zhang Ziwer, but on the other hand, he clearly understood that he did not have long to live, yet he still adamantly wanted to marry her, clearly knowing that she would become a widow. This contradictory fellow, Han Li secretly gave his good friend a not-so-pleasant evaluation. Han Li lightly jumped and descended from the rooftop. Shortly afterwards, Li Feiyu followed him down. "Let me go gather some things, then we will leave immediately." "All right, but you have to hurry. I'm really worried about Ziwer's safety." Hearing this, Han Li could only remain speechless. The other was constantly muttering, "Ziwer," sounding extremely sappy and making Han Li feel a bit of despise mixed with jealousy. Han Li no longer continued to pay attention to the love-stricken Li Feiyu. He minded his own business and proceeded to enter his own house, starting to swiftly collect all sorts of different yet essential items. Chapter 78 Forest Massacre. Chapter 78 Forest Massacre. "Are you done?" Unable to hold himself back, Li Feiyu hurriedly asked Han Li upon seeing him walking out from his residence. Han Li glared at Li Feiyu before walking to another smaller residence, closing the door, and coldly stating, "Crooked soul, come out. Tonight will all depend on you." Even before the sound of Han Li's voice faded away, a pang sound rang out. The wooden door was like a piece of paper, disintegrating into dust as the shadow of a huge body walked out. Both of Li Feiyu's eyes somewhat straightened as he froze. He gazed at that huge giant in front of him that was emitting a demonic aura. However, a hood was wrapped around its head, obscuring its features. The huge giant silently walked behind Han Li. "Let's go," Han Li smiled. Now it was his turn to urge Li Feiyu along. "Oh," Li Feiyu gasped, as if he just awoken from shock. He had a strange expression as he gazed from Han Li to the giant before closing his mouth and silently leading the way out of the valley. Han Li stared at the back of Li Feiyu and he snickered before walking faster, catching up with his friend. The giant crooked soul followed closely behind. Han Li was extremely pleased with Li Feiyu's discreetness. This was because the both of them had mutual respect of their privacy. This was also one of the reasons why they became such close friends. Their walking speed was extremely quick, and in the blink of an eye, they had already arrived at the entrance of the valley. Just as Li Feiyu raised his leg to step into the forest, Han Li abruptly extended his right hand and caught Li Feiyu's shoulder, stopping him from moving any further. "What are you doing?" Li Feiyu asked, bewildered and dissatisfied. One must know that his heart was very anxious, akin to a raging fire. "There's someone coming, and there's more than just one of them," Han Li gently explained. Li Feiyu was shocked and immediately focused his senses to listen, but even after a long while, there was nothing to be heard. Suspicion apparent in his eyes, he stared at Han Li, but Han Li disregarded his gaze and did not provide an explanation to him. "You?" Just as Li Feiyu opened his mouth, Han Li abruptly raised a finger, placing it upon his lips and signaling for Li Feiyu's silence. Li Feiyu furrowed his brows. Although he was extremely unwilling because of force of habit, he decided to listen to Han Li and stayed silent. Quite a while passed by. This time around, Li Feiyu's expression grew heavy as he turned his head in amazement to gaze at Han Li. He had finally heard the sound of many footsteps ringing out. It seemed like there truly was a group of people. Enforcer Sun, beside this forest there's both a huge bell-shaped valley and a small road. Seems like this is the God Hand Valley that the Vice Commander informed us of. A brash-sounding voice rang out from the direction of the forest. "Right, according to the map in this huge bell-shaped valley there's no mistake. This is the place. You all better remember the Commander has issued an absolute order. We are to abduct the Divine Doctor alive. No one is allowed to hurt him, otherwise that person will be dealt with according to rules of the gang. Understood?" Another sharp-sounding voice rang out, akin to that of a mother hen commanding her little chicks. "Yes. Yes. The..." A series of confirmations sounded out at the same moment, and judging from the voices that replied out loud, there should have been over 10 people. Their breath control seemed pretty strong, making them all seem like martial arts experts. Other than that blue-robed enforcer, the rest of the feral wolf gang are all elites. The blue-robed enforcer is akin to the protectors from our sect, while the elites were akin to the inner disciples, Li Feiyu mumbled in a low voice, explaining to Han Li. Li Feiyu knew that his good friend had never once shown the inclination to care about their sex matters, so he couldn't be bothered to continue asking Han Li how he was able to notice the sound of the footsteps that far away. Instead, he opted to use the time to explain the situation and what their identities were to Han Li, intending to warn Han Li not to be careless. The moment Han Li heard Li Feiyu speak, he instantly understood what Li Feiyu was trying to convey. He lightly smiled and said nothing. From the look on his face, it appeared that Han Li was extremely unconcerned. Li Feiyu was growing increasingly more anxious. "Based on my current strength, there's no way to clash directly in a one-on-one fight with that blue-robed enforcer, not to mention their elites surrounding him. I know that you would usually have a lot of cunning plans, so quickly list whatever ideas you have. If not, it will soon be too late to take action." Li Feiyu's sentence was enunciated extremely quickly because the group of people had already entered into the forest and started to walk towards them. "If not, let us temporarily hide first, evading the vanguard of our enemies." Li Feiyu suggested a seemingly excellent idea, but what was lamentable to Li Feiyu was that Han Li had no intention to heed his advice. "Crooked soul, other than that blue-robed enforcer, I want you to annihilate everyone in that forest." Han Li turned his head, looking at the giant man as he commanded in a cold tone. "What?" Li Feiyu was thunderstruck after he heard the words that Han Li had uttered. But even before he recovered, that huge giant behind Han Li moved with the speed of a hurricane, rapidly dashing away in the pitch-dark forest. Almost immediately, the voices of the feral wolf gang members cried out, "Ai ya! Who is it? /T, there's an ambush. What is this monster, Arg? Run quickly, Arg." Mournful cries of shock rang out in the forest, turning into a cacophony of miserable shrieks before they slowly faded away. Before long, there was only silence. Li Feiyu blankly stared in the direction of the forest with a face full of disbelief. Chapter 79, Questioning. Chapter 79, Questioning. Similar to grabbing hold of a little chick, the huge giant carried the blue-robed man with a single hand and rapidly walked out of the forest. Its body, covered with blood stains coupled with the sight of its green robes, was similar to the brilliance of a blossoming peach flower. Li Feiyu sucked in a breath of cold air. As the huge giant walked in front of the two, it tossed the blue-robed man onto the ground. Shortly after, Li Feiyu could smell an acrid smell of blood wafting towards him. Li Feiyu's expression underwent a tremendous change as he unconsciously stepped backwards, making a warding gesture with his hands. The huge giant did not concern itself with Li Feiyu's actions. Instead, it strode forward and stood behind Han Li, becoming silent and motionless as if it had never left that spot. Only then did Li Feiyu let out a breath of air. He suddenly let out a laugh as he looked at the blue-robed man on the ground while surreptitiously stealing glances at the calm Han Li. I say, how can you still be so calm and collected? So the reason was because of the expert behind your back. Why didn't you tell me earlier? You caused me to panic this whole time. Although appearing very relaxed on the surface, Li Feiyu's heart was wildly trembling as he started to guess at the relationship between the green-robed giant and Han Li. Han Li could tell what Li Feiyu was thinking, but he had no intention to explain anything to him. An enigmatic smile broke out on Han Li's visage as he calmly said, "This blue-robed enforcer should know plenty of information. Who among us is going to interrogate him? I feel that you, Division Head Deputy Li, should have more experience in this than me. Shall I leave him to you?" Noting how Han Li dodged the question, he knew that Han Li had no intention of introducing the huge giant to him. As such, he couldn't help but feel worried in his heart. However, regarding the interrogation of the enforcer, he was extremely interested. After he heard Han Li's suggestion, he swiftly accepted the proposition like a boat flowing along with the current. Li Feiyu lifted the blue-robed man, lightly dashed into the forest, and started his interrogation while Han Li leisurely sat down on a nearby grass patch. After a while, Li Feiyu came out of the forest with a gloomy look on his face. "Why are you so fast? Is there any news that we could use?" Han Li didn't stand up. He merely twitched his brows as he asked. "HMPH, that craven coward, I haven't even done anything to him and he already told me everything. As for news, there are two pieces of information, one good and one bad. Which one do you want to hear about first?" Li Feiyu replied in a depressed manner. "Give me the good news first. At least we would be happier after hearing it," Han Li indifferently said. "The good news is that your guess regarding the feral wolf gang's plan was right. The auxiliary forces have no intention of initiating the attack, instead want to surround the valley by taking possession of the other mountain peaks. Meanwhile, their main force is mobilizing towards the setting sun summit to launch an aggressive attack. He said that they have already gained control of many important outposts." Li Feiyu sounded calm, as though he did not care about the safety of those with high level of authority. If that was the good news, there's no need to ask. The bad news must be truly terrible. Han Li rubbed his nose as he said this with confidence. "Crowmouth, you are spot on. The bad news is that several small sects, such as the Metal Spear Association and the Broken Water Sect, have joined the Feral Wolf Gang's attack against the Celestial Rainbow Mountains. It seems like our Seven Mysteries Sect is going to face an imminent catastrophe." TL Crowmouth, a person who always says pessimistic things. Han Li froze in shock after hearing the news. This was outside of his expectations. "We shouldn't care about the number of attackers. It would be best to meet up your young beloved and underlings and leave here under the cover provided by the chaotic battle." Han Li was quite collected as he made a rational suggestion. Li Feiyu quickly indicated his consent, as this plan suited his needs. "And that fellow, how did you handle him?" Han Li suddenly asked. "I killed him. Are you saying that we should have brought him along?" Li Feiyu coldly replied. After hearing this, Han Li let out a small smile as he put one hand on the ground and sprung up from his sitting position. "Let's go. We should try to avoid any enemies. If we are unable to do so, kill all those who discover us. There is no need to show mercy." Han Li had spoken lightly, but his words contained boundless killing intent and bloodlust. A few li away from God Hand Valley, Elder Li's courtyard was currently swamped with people. There were males and females, all young and old. They appeared to know not the slightest bit of martial arts and were discussing something in low voices with frightened expressions on their faces. Two black-robed figures equipped with swords and sabers were nearby the courtyard, guarding vigilantly. Compared to the people inside the courtyard, they were extremely eye-catching. In the living room of one of the residences, two people were in the middle of a discussion. "I object to sending people outside. Our defensive position here is not that strong. If I still send people out, wouldn't our position weaken further?" "No, absolutely not." A middle-aged fatty with a huge pot belly sprayed saliva all over the place as he shook his head rapidly, objecting with determination. "But we have no idea what's going on out there. If we don't send people to scout, wouldn't that be akin to blinding ourselves? This is too passive." The person who was arguing against the fatty was none other than Ma Rong, Elder Li's cherished disciple. "Passive? So be it. The things that happen out there have nothing to do with me, and to me, safety is most important. This is the best place to be in this situation. Don't tell me you are going to defy my orders." The fatty blinked his small eyes and suddenly took out a golden yellow tablet from his robes, shaking the command medallion in front of Ma Rong as a look of insufferable arrogance appeared on his face. Ma Rong glanced at the fatty before looking at the command medallion. Sighing, he cupped his hands and replied, "The little me does not dare. I shall follow your esteemed orders." Chapter 80, Encountering the Enemy. Chapter 80, Encountering the Enemy. This command medallion was equivalent to having sect leader Wang's personal authority. To possess the medallion enabled one to command all the disciples with a rank lower than an elder. This fatty happened to be sect leader Wang's trusted aide, who was rumored to be sect leader Wang's close cousin. Therefore, any orders or messages that sect leader Wang had would be communicated through this man. Not long ago, sect leader Wang had granted this command medallion in a hurry, relying on the fatty to ask Elder Li, who was up on the mountaintop, to discuss certain matters. However, after this fatty finished relaying orders, he felt that immediately hurrying back after sunset would be too exhausting. By taking advantage of the dutiful trust bestowed on him, he stayed at Elder Li's mansion to take a moment of rest before returning down the mountain. Elder Li helplessly accommodated him because he did not dare to offend him. He arranged for Zhang Ziwer and several other disciples to take him down the mountain as soon the sun set. After a short amount of time, however, momentous changes occurred on the mountaintop due to the feral wolf gang's assault. This fatty's cowardice was incomparable, so naturally, he was unwilling to return alone. However, the people in the courtyard were the many family members of the disciples belonging to the Seven Mysteries Sect. Most of them did not know any martial arts, and because of their inability, they lost their heads from fear once the sound of chaos reached them. What could they possibly do? Fortunately, Ma Rong was quite decisive. He promptly requested help from the 20 disciples that Li Feiyu left under his control and gathered all of them together. Since they were all rounded up, they were prevented from running amok in the night and encountering any mishaps. Because this place was quite remote and built on the mountain pass, these people would not understand anything that was going on. Even if they had heard the alarm and the loud battle cries in the end, all the noise belonged to affairs that happened outside. They wouldn't understand what was happening. Thus, after Ma Rong had quickly finished analyzing the situation, he planned to dispatch a few people to go outside and ask around for news. At this time, the fatty, who was incapable of even the slightest ability in martial arts, acted under false pretenses. Not only did he prevent them from scouting for information, he also relied on the command medallion to snatch away Ma Rong's authority over these outer sect junior disciples. After that, he planned to secure the location and bury his head in the sand. Ma Rong knew the importance of having accurate information about the enemy. He tried discussing this matter of importance several times with the fatty, but the fatty was too scared to care. Because the fatty was abusing the authority of sect leader Wang's command medallion, Ma Rong wasn't even allowed to personally scout around. It seemed apparent that the fatty thought Ma Rong was his personal guard for the preservation of his life. As such, Ma Rong was inside the living room, as anxious as a cat on a hot tin roof, and walked around in circles. Nevertheless, he still followed this ignorant fatty. In the Seven Mysteries Sect, harsh discipline was given to those who disobeyed orders and took actions without permission. Light offenses were punished by the destruction of one's cultivation and expulsion from the sect. However, it would be difficult to preserve one's life if he or she had committed a heavy offense, because the only punishment available was beheading the offender. Ma Rong was fully aware that the world-shaking events occurring outside could likely be a matter of life or death for the sect, but he was unable to move a single step. At this moment, Ma Rong wished that he could slap this so-called superior to death. Meanwhile, Han Li and Li Feiyu did not have the slightest knowledge about what was happening, so they were hurrying to Elder Lil's residence as a result. On the journey there, they met several bandits and had to either avoid or dodge around their enemies. They also hid their tracks as frequently as possible. When they were only a li away, half a kilometer from Elder Li's residence, they ran directly into a group of black-clothed people and thus were unable to conceal their presence. This was their first encounter with the enemy. Currently, there were over 10 black-clothed people holding steel sabers. They surrounded Han Li, Li Feiyu, and Crooked Soul from every direction. From examining their footwork, it seemed to Han Li that those who had a single line of white embroidery on their sleeves were the weakest of the group as well as the majority of the members. The martial artists with 2 white lines embroidered on their sleeves were a little stronger, but the strongest opponents were the ones with 3 white lines. It was clear that the man with scars on his face was the leader of this group. As the scar-faced leader carefully sized up the men whom he had surrounded, he secretly felt somewhat baffled. It was not surprising that the scar-faced leader felt this way. Standing in the middle of the trio, Li Feiyu had disheveled hair, and his appearance was dirty and worn. He looked as if he were a cook from the mountains. Han Li's eyes were emotionless, while his skin was dark like a farmer who did not know martial arts. However, their lofty builds had produced greater pressure. They also wore bamboo hats. Besides them was a blood-stained crooked soul. Standing together, these 3 seemed out of place as they stood together. Even though the scar-faced leader had plenty of experience in Jianghu, he was somewhat puzzled. He sent a gaze toward his subordinates, signaling at them to not let their guard down. He then loudly yelled toward the opposing party, "Regardless of who you are, the Seven Mysteries Sect has already fallen. Surrender and your lives will be spared." Han Li smiled, turned his head to Li Feiyu and said, "Who will handle this? Or would you rather have Crooked Soul take care of this?" As Li Feiyu heard his words, his eyes flashed with an ominous glint. He sternly replied, "From these people's clothes, they should be low-level disciples of the Broken Water Sect. I've hunted and killed bandits from the Feral Wolf Gang for a long time. Let me vent my resentments onto them. Besides, it just so happens that I have a use for their weapons." By the time Li Feiyu had finished talking, the enemy forces were fanned out like a rainbow. In a blink of an eye, Li Feiyu was already in front of the closest man dressed in black. The man in black was surprised and almost forgot about flourishing his steel saber. However, he found that the saber in his hands were suddenly in the hands of his enemy. He hastily recoiled in panic, but it was already too late. A line of light flashed, separating his head from his body. With a series of movements that were neat, nimble, and as quick as lightning, Li Feiyu had already killed many of the Broken Water Sect disciples with the stolen saber before they could react against him. The complexions of the people who remained began to greatly change, especially the leader with the disfigured face. Because his martial arts were far greater than the others, his heart had sunk the furthest. He clearly remembered encountering disastrous experts in the past. Back then, he couldn't contend against them in the least. Therefore, he decisively commanded, "Everyone, retreat, scatter, quickly send out the signal and call the experts for reinforcements." This sentence caught the attention of the other men in black clothes, and they quickly fell back. Because of their original positioning in a circle, they scattered in all directions, fleeing rapidly. Some had run to the side, grabbing something from their bosom. They seemed to have fished out the so-called signal. A black-clothed man with 2 embroidered lines ran the fastest. With just a few steps, he had already fled several zhang. TL, 1 zhang is equal to 10 kai, or 3.58 meters. He secretly rejoiced, thinking that there was some hope in fleeing for his life. However, he failed to notice a cool feeling on the back of his neck. A half-inch point pierced through his Adam's apple and then immediately disappeared without a trace. Seeing this, he couldn't help but be overwhelmed with shock. He wanted to yell at the top of his lungs, but suddenly he couldn't feel his body. Losing all his strength, he stared helplessly at his body as he slowly collapsed, his back limp on the floor. He was no longer capable of moving even a single step. At this moment, he realized that a sword had unexpectedly penetrated his throat. This black-clothed person felt unresigned. He had obviously escaped the furthest, so how could he have died so quickly? With great effort, he turned his head to the side. Facing death's door, he saw in his final moments an intermittent shadow that had appeared behind the second, furthermost distant black-clothed man. With a slash as light as a feather, the shadow flashed and faded away. After that, another fellow sect disciple appeared, and a similar white light flashed. The sword pierced the throat of a fellow sect disciple yet again. Like him, their bodies fell onto the meadow with blood leaking from their throats. After witnessing the shadow's assassinations, this black-clothed man smiled and accepted his death because he knew he would not die alone. Soon he would be accompanied by many others. That shadow was like a demon, and it was unlikely that a single one of the black-clothed disciples could slip away from this demon's grasp. Chapter 81 Jia Tianlong. Chapter 81 Jia Tianlong. At this moment, Golden Wolf Jia Tianlong appeared smug. Because of the excitement, his normally pale and gloomy face had a slight flush. It was no wonder that he had such an expression. After all, the Seven Mysteries Sect was Feral Wolf Gang's archenemy. Under his elaborate scheme, all those who were still alive would fall before him. As the commander of Feral Wolf Gang, he had the right to be arrogant. He stood halfway between the base of the mountain and setting sun summit. As it turned out, There were around 50 to 60 red-clothed members of the Feral Wolf Gang's Iron Guard surrounding the sentry post on the border of Seven Mysteries Sect. Jia Tianlong had spent a substantial amount of painstaking effort to meticulously groom his army. Not only were they all highly capable in martial arts, they also had undying loyalty to Jia Tianlong. He had always regarded this army as a precious asset and would not normally utilize it in ordinary battles. However, at this moment, he brought the entire army with him just to completely intimidate the small and mid-sized gangs that were beginning to stir up trouble. The chiefs of Metal Spear Association and Broken Water Sect, who had been planning to rebel, were forced to obediently listen to his orders. After all, the smaller gangs did not wish to see Feral Wolf Gang standing alone. They all hoped that the two great powers would forever be in the midst of a struggle, creating cracks in which the smaller gangs could exist. Jia Tianlong did not have a decisive personality. Had it not been for the fact that Jia Tianlong had kidnapped the children of the gang chiefs, as well as promised the smaller gangs a profit for helping the Feral Wolf Gang in this endeavor, the smaller gangs would have changed sides a long time ago. At this thought, Jia Tianlong involuntarily turned his head back to glance at several of the gang chiefs that were standing nearby. All of the people present were downcast. Seeing Jia Tianlong gaze towards them, they either glared back at him or avoided looking at him in the face. Looking at this situation, Jia Tianlong laughed coldly in his heart. Returning his attention to his front, he started thinking of a plan to annex all these small gangs after he took down the Seven Mysteries Sect. In front of Jia Tianlong, there were close to 1,000 men present, all wearing different kinds of clothes and holding different weapons. They attacked the Seven Mysteries Sect's sentry posts like a swarm of bees. Because there was no formation due to the neglect of cooperation between these people, there were a lot of casualties. However, Jia Tianlong did not care because the people who were currently attacking were not from his Feral Wolf Gang. They were people that belonged to the Metal Spear Association and the Broken Water Sect. In the first place, he did not place any hope in their ability to take over Setting Sun Summit. He only wanted them to waste the sentry's energies, so that his elite troops and crossbows could easily pick off the remaining exhausted sentries. Thinking of those military-grade rapid-fire crossbows, Jia Tianlong's calm expression revealed a trace of delight. This time, the Feral Wolf Gang easily gained a winning advantage through the killing machines that were used by the gang's troops. Otherwise, it would have been impossible to annihilate the opponent's troops. Even if a dozen of the Setting Sun Summit sentry posts were taken down, the Feral Wolf Gang's troops would suffer a great loss in strength, making it very detrimental for his future plan to annex the smaller gangs. Jia Tianlong did not spend a slightest bit of effort on the military-grade crossbows. Instead, they appeared out of nowhere in his home. Every time Jia Tianlong recalled that matter, he would immediately feel at ease. This happened 3 months ago when he was at his headquarters, planning an assault on the Seven Mysteries Sect. Out of the blue, there was an officer claiming to be his relative who wanted to see him. Jia Tianlong felt somewhat astonished and met with that person. It turned out that the person was truly his older cousin from his father's side. Apparently, around 10 years ago, when Feral Wolf Gang was still a group of horse-mounted bandits, a portion of the gang had been ordered by the Jing Province's imperial court to enlist in the army in return for amnesty. This cousin was among that group of men. As years went by, his cousin was unexpectedly landed the position of deputy general in the army. Coincidentally, when his cousin was on the road escorting some goods across Jing Province, he had heard of Jia Tianlong, commander of Feral Wolf Gang. He naturally had to come and visit this cousin of his. When the two people had met, they exchanged some rueful greetings. Then, they both had talked about their experiences over the years. As Jia Tianlong mentioned the recent skirmishes against the Seven Mysteries Sect, his cousin offhandedly proclaimed that their resistance would quickly fall if he provided Jia Tianlong with 100 rapid-fire crossbows of good quality. Jia Tianlong would be able to kill everyone in the Seven Mysteries Sect until there was no one left. Though his cousin might have mentioned it casually, Jia Tianlong listened with intent as his heart skipped a beat. He tried asking his cousin if it was possible to give him the 100 crossbows. His cousin slightly laughed and told Jia Tianlong honestly that the goods he was transporting were exactly these rapid-fire crossbows. It was not that he could not give Jia Tianlong any, but rather that he could not give away too many. He only had to bribe the government officials receiving the goods with a few taels of silver. Jia Tianlong rejoiced at what his cousin said and spent the 2 silvers at once, exchanging them for 300 rapid-fire crossbows from his cousin. Jia Tianlong entrusted them to his trusted subordinates to utilize them well, resulting in the recent series of victories. Their defense has been broken. There's a breach. A burst of earth-shaking sounds rang out, startling Jia Tianlong from his thoughts. He was somewhat shocked and hastily raised his head to look towards the mountain peak, only to see that the Seven Mysteries Sect sentry posts had really been breached and were jam-packed with people from the smaller gangs. Jia Tianlong wrinkled his brows as he felt that something was a bit strange. According to the strength of the defending guards, it was reasonable to say that the last stretch ought to be even more difficult to attack. How could it be taken down by some miscellaneous troops? Perhaps there was some other conspiracy in play. A gloomy expression appeared on his face. Anyone that was familiar with Commander Jia Tianlong would know that this was a sign that he was not pleased in his heart. If anyone provoked him during this time, that person would wish he or she was dead. Since it has been breached, why are we not moving? A voice sounding like a broken gong rang out. There was no hint of respect for Commander Jia Tianlong contained in that sentence. Commander Jia Tianlong would have been extremely angry, but instead he turned around and respectfully said, "Master Zhang, I feel that there is something fishy about this breach. I'm afraid there might be a trap located inside. It's better to be a bit more cautious." "What are you afraid of? With me by your side, how can these ordinary people even be able to hurt you? Let's go, let's go. I've been here for close to an entire night. I'm extremely tired. The faster we dispose of these Seven Mysteries Sect bastards, the faster I can rest my old bones." This voice did not sound old at all, but he let out an overflowing archaic tone that was very irritating to the ear. Chapter 82, Monk Golden Light. Chapter 82, Monk Golden Light. The person who spoke was a 3-feet-tall dwarf standing beside Jia Tianlong. The dwarf was 40 years old and had a thin body frame that was covered by a red robe embroidered with gold thread. On his finger and around his neck were, respectively, a gold ring and an extremely thick gold chain. Around his waist, several gold bells hung from his belt. Even his gold teeth reflected a golden light whenever he opened his mouth. This was a look that only the rich could afford to have. At this moment, impatience clouded his features. Evidently, he was extremely unsatisfied with Jia Tianlong's cautiousness. Disguised as a wealthy merchant from a village, the dwarf actually dared to show such disrespect towards Jia Tianlong. This caused the loyal iron guards standing nearby to glare at the dwarf with extreme rage smoldering in their eyes. This dwarf could obviously see the rage within the eyes of Jia Tianlong's loyal iron guards, and he coldly laughed, as if he did not put them in his eyes at all. He even arrogantly stated, "Commander Jia, you spent 3,000 taels of gold to invite me over. Surely the money you spent was not just for me to passively stare in vain for an entire night, correct? Whoever you need me to deal with, just tell me directly. However, you don't need me to deal with the sect leader of the Seven Mysteries Sect, right? Against such a weak person, you can just settle it yourself. Why do you still need to spend money and hire me for assistance? Just a mere sect leader of the Seven Mysteries Sect truly does not warrant the attention of Immortal Master. The reason why I invited Immortal Master was because the sect leader of the Seven Mysteries Sect still has 3 senior martial uncles. On the surface, these 3 people have been declared dead, but in reality, they have been undergoing closed-door cultivation inside a hidden chamber on Setting Sun Summit. I'm afraid that their current cultivation bases have already broken through to the transformation realm. Against these martial uncles, ordinary experts would not be a match for them. These 3 people are the strongest pillars of the Seven Mysteries Sect. Thus, I have no choice but to humbly beseech Immortal Master to deal with them for us." Jia Tianlong sounded extremely pathetic, without a hint of anger in his voice. Jia Tianlong had coincidentally met this red-robed dwarf in a Taoist temple near the border of the Savage Lands. A self-proclaimed monk golden light. This martial arts expert was equipped with immense magical powers, and he had demonstrated techniques for controlling flying swords and cultivating an invulnerable steel body. After Jia Tianlong personally witnessed this, he was deeply mesmerized by the might displayed by the 2 techniques. When he suspected that the dwarf was most likely someone who had walked the fabled path of immortals, he decided to establish a relationship with him. After knowing that the dwarf had an extreme obsession with gold, Jia Tianlong immediately gifted a huge amount of gold to the dwarf. With this, he had finally moved the dwarf's heart, obtaining a promise that the dwarf would help him with his problems just once. Thus, Jia Tianlong acted meek and humble like someone from the junior generation whenever he was in the dwarf's presence, not daring to reveal the slightest bit of disrespect. He was very clear in his heart. This monk Golden Light was someone that his tiny feral wolf gang was unable to contend with. After Monk Golden Light heard his request, he let out a crazed laughter. Once his laughter subsided, he exclaimed arrogantly, "Just a few mortals. Leave them to me. No matter how high their cultivation bases have reached, no matter how strong their martial arts are, they would definitely not be a match for my flying sword technique. You can just relax. Then, I will have to trouble Immortal Master. The rewards I promised will definitely be delivered, and what's more, I've decided that after the matter is settled, the reward will be increased by 2,000 taels of gold." Jia Tianlong appeared overjoyed as he increased the reward without hesitation. After all, he knew that his helper was certainly not amiable. It was better if he directly used gold to speak. After Monk Golden Light heard this, traces of a smile broke out on his wizened face. He nodded his head in satisfaction, obviously happy with the increased reward. After obtaining the guarantee of such a powerful figure, Monk Golden Light, Jia Tianlong no longer remained cautious and commanded his forces from the feral wolf gang to rush to the top of the setting sun summit to prepare to attack the main division of the Seven Mysteries Sect, the Seven Supreme Division. Because there were so many people rushing up the summit, Jia Tianlong and the rest of the Iron Guard had to expend tremendous effort to finally arrive at the entrance of the division. Staring at the main division of his most hated enemy, Commander Jia was still taken aback by the majesty of the Seven Supreme Division Hall. He felt that the main hall of his feral wolf gang was nothing but a dog tunnel, unbearable to be looked upon when compared to this place. Looking at the empty acres of land on top of Setting Sun Summit, there were quite a number of halls constructed from bluestone, one large building, followed by 6 smaller ones. Although the dim light from the torches was insufficient to fully see the details of the buildings in the dark of the night, the imposing and majestic aura of the bluestone halls was still capable of astonishing the members of Feral Wolf Gang and the other small sects. The attackers did not immediately start their attack, but rather surrounded the bluestone halls, with the intent to not even allow a single fly pass through. Indeed, our opponent is a sect that has existed for over 200 years. This level of wealth simply could not be matched by the clans and sects that have only existed for a decade. How extravagant! Jia Tianlong silently exclaimed in his heart. He had already decided that once the Seven Mysteries Sect was eliminated, he would immediately move over to the main Bluestone Hall and designate it as his center of command. Such a majestic building would only benefit a status such as his own. Jia Tianlong glanced at the main hall's pitch-black entrance. After observing his surroundings, he slowly raised his right hand into the air. In that moment, silence descended upon the people surrounding the Setting Sun summit as the gazes of the crowd turned to Jia Tianlong's hand. They knew that once the arm was swung down, it would signal the start of the attack. "Wait!" Suddenly, a cold voice drifted over from the pitch-black main hall. "Padu padu." A wave of footsteps rang out from within, as the sound grew clearer and clearer. Finally, a white-robed, middle-aged man emerged. This figure had a wooden hairpin on, and the only equipment he had on his body was a longsword in a white scabbard. His face was incomparably pale, but his eyes were bright. Wherever he looked, those who met his gaze felt as if sharp swords had cut into their hearts, causing them to shiver despite the warm air. After leaving the hall and walking 10 meters away, he stopped as he slowly contemplated the crowd standing in front of him, without a trace of fear in his eyes. Finally, his vision landed upon Jia Tianlong's right hand that was raised up in the air. His gaze moved from Jia Tianlong's right arm to Jia Tianlong's face. "Jia Tianlong," this middle-aged man shouted out the name of Commander Jia. Wang Jiuchu, not wanting to appear weak, Jia Tianlong also shouted out the name of his adversary. "Speaking of which, this is the first time that we've met face-to-face as the respective leaders of our individual camps, is it not, my dear sect leader Wang?" Jia Tianlong used a leisurely tone as traces of a mocking smile hung upon his lips. He slowly retracted his extended right arm from the air. Wang Jiuchu stared expressionlessly at Jia Tianlong without saying anything. The atmosphere began to grow increasingly tense. "Sect leader Wang came to this place alone. Could it be that you intend to surrender?" Smiling, Jia Tianlong asked this question with a hint of ridicule. "You are correct. I wanted to discuss with you matters regarding a surrender," the Seven Mysteries Sect leader, Wang Jiuchu, replied icily, similar to a sculpture made of frigid snow. Chapter 83, A Huge Pitfall. Chapter 83, A Huge Pitfall. "Do you truly plan to surrender?" Jia Tianlong felt somewhat surprised. To surrender is to surrender. However, which side will surrender to whom, that has not yet been decided. Saying this slowly, sect leader Wang narrowed his eyes and consciously brought his hand to the longsword's hilt. What is the meaning behind your words? Jia Tianlong's face sank, but soon after he waved his hand, signaling his men to surround sect leader Wang. Immediately, his iron guards rushed forth from behind him and surrounded Wang Juchu in a semicircle. At the same time, they took out powerful crossbows. With flashes of green light, the iron guards pointed their crossbow bolts at him. It seemed that with a single command from Jia Tianlong, they would indiscriminately release a barrage of arrows without hesitation, immediately shooting at Wang Juchu on the spot. You believe that just because we moved the sect's lower-ranked disciples to Setting Sun Summit, we had never thought of an external enemy invasion, and thus were incapable of resisting. Sect leader Wang's voice contained a somewhat menacing and sinister tone, as he seemed to have turned a blind eye to the crossbow bolts. Hearing these words, Jia Tianlong's heart slightly sunk. His mind felt a trace of obscure foreboding. He didn't interrupt the sect leader Wang's words, and instead continued to have a gloomy expression on his face. Jia Tianlong wanted to hear what his enemy ultimately had to say. The one who migrated the sect to this location was the 7th-generation sect leader Li. Not only did that person have great skill and strategies, he was also an expert in construction and machinery. He was named the top genius of his generation. With this said, sect leader Wang shortly paused, expressing a hint of admiration. He opened his mouth and continued. Sect leader Li selected Setting Sun Summit as the sect's main hall. There were two reasons for this. One reason is that the mountain peak is dangerous. Because it is easy to guard and hard to attack, it is an exceptional defensive location strategically. The second reason is that within the center of this mountain peak lies a vast natural stalactite cave. This cave is wonderful beyond compare. It occupies nearly 2/3 of the Setting Sun Summit. Seeing this marvel, sect leader Li made plans in his mind to integrate of all the construction techniques he possessed with the terrain of the stalactite cave, and he turned the entire mountain peak into a huge natural pitfall. So long as there were people to activate the mechanism, the entire mountain peak would immediately collapse, burying all the people on the summit. After sect leader Wang finished talking, he stayed silent. He swept his eyes over the crowd before him with a cold gaze that one would use on a corpse. After Jia Tianlong finished hearing this, he stood in amazement. He naturally did not believe the opposition's words, but after a few moments, he did not know how he would refute sect leader Wang's menacing words. The others on the mountain clearly heard these words. They all couldn't help but become restless and talk about it softly. A few of the somewhat clever ones had even begun to slowly draw closer to the only road off the mountain. They were prepared to wildly rush off the mountain the moment something went wrong. Silence! Those clamoring or flailing about will be killed mercilessly. Jia Tianlong quickly regained his calm. Seeing his own men turn disorderly on just a bluff, he couldn't help but become irritated. He knew that if he did not immediately put a stop to their restlessness, the situation would become a lot harder to control. He soon acted without thinking and loudly issued a stern command. Jia Tianlong's order was well executed by his loyal subordinates. After they beheaded a few of the cowards that had attempted to escape, the rest were intimidated and quelled, their roars suppressed. However, Jia Tianlong understood that this suppression was only superficial and temporary. If he could not confirm what the opponent had said were lies, regardless of what gang or faction the men belonged to, they would all be unable to stay here at ease. He feared that this rumor would spread and cause all of them to flee. You can't convince us that your words are true on the mere basis that you said them. Jia Tianlong strongly restrained the anger in his heart, intending to personally expose sect leader Wang's fabrication. Of course not. I have plenty of proof. Just stay here and see it for yourself. Regardless of whether or not you heard properly, if someone were to see my proof and intends to escape or possibly continue their assault, I would activate the entire mechanism and end us all. Wang Juchu's words were filled with desire to kill, as his menacing intentions were undoubtedly revealed. Jia Tianlong carefully examined his enemy's expression, trying to find some mistake or gap in his state of mind. Unfortunately, Wang Juchu's face was ice-cold through and through. No indication of falsehood had appeared, nor was the slightest degree of false confidence shown. Jia Tianlong couldn't help but murmur to himself, "Don't tell me that sect leader Wang's words were not a deception, but rather an actual scheme to destroy anyone on the summit, including the sect." Activate the second mechanism. Wang Juchu suddenly turned his head to the sect hall and loudly commanded. He then turned his head to the side and began staring at the comparatively small stone hall, no longer paying attention to Jia Tianlong. Seeing his opponent look down on him in such way, Jia Tianlong couldn't help but be angry. With great difficulty, he resisted the anger in his heart and inwardly resolved himself. So long as the opponent's evidence did not satisfy him, he would immediately give the order to turn this sect leader Wang into a human-shaped hedgehog. However, Wang Juchu's strange stare towards the stone hall had aroused the attention of the feral wolf gang members. They couldn't help but turn their gazes as well, wanting to see if anything strange would occur. The feral wolf gang members were all restless. None of them took notice of two people wearing broken water sect clothing, lowering their heads and whispering. Han Li, do you think what our sect leader said was true? Don't tell me that this huge setting sun summit is truly hollow. I have come here several times before and never felt anything amiss in this place. Could it be that sect leader Wang is trying to deceive them in order to stall for time? Maybe. A young man was talking to a taciturn youth in the midst of the crowd, discussing the offensive. It seemed that they had great doubts regarding Wang Juchu's explanation. These two people were not bystanders, but were in fact Han Li and Li Feiyu, who had rushed to Elder Li's residence in disguise. Chapter 84, A Tremendous Battle. Chapter 84, A Tremendous Battle. Earlier, Han Li was afraid that the Broken Water Sect's disciples would escape and alert the other enemies, so he had to personally get involved. Using shifting smoke steps and Imperial flight technique in unison, he easily killed all the enemies in a short span of time. Li Feiyu, who was thinking of continuing his attack, was dumbstruck. Only then did he realize Han Li's true strength. After recovering from his dazed state, Li Feiyu was shocked that Han Li was able to possess such astonishing skill. Han Li's battle prowess was a result of cultivating blinking sword art. This kind of thinking caused him to panic the moment he stepped up into the arena and immediately disturb his own inner strength, wishing he had cultivated in the blinking sword art. Luckily, he knew the bitter truth. Regardless of time or aptitude, it was too late for him to switch to a different sword art. Further down the road, Li Feiyu continuously threw up his heart's grief and sighed heavily at the lucky bastard, Han Li, for being able to learn such a terrifying skill. Han Li was not in the mood to comprehend his good friend's sour mood. Instead, he started to ruthlessly kill all the enemies he met, intending to reveal his true strength. All the enemies that encountered Han Li's strange technique were neither able to withstand nor receive a single blow. They all breathed their last breath of air, and even the high-ranked experts were no exception. With Han Li's exhibition of might, the two of them easily reached Elder Li's residence and saw Ma Rong. They received news from Ma Rong that Elder Li and Zhang Ziyu had already ascended Setting Sun Summit. Upon hearing this grievous news, Li Feiyu's face turned green. He knew that the current Setting Sun Summit was an extremely dangerous place. Zhang Ziyu entering that area was like setting a foot into the gates of hell. With the lack of a better option, the two of them discussed for a moment and came out of Elder Li's residence, hurriedly heading towards the direction of Setting Sun Summit. But upon their departure, there was a minor disturbance. When the two of them were about to leave, that loathsome fatty, the trusted aide of sect leader Wang, took out the command medallion and ordered them threateningly to stay behind or else he would deal with them according to the sect's rules. Currently, Li Feiyu was very impatient as he was only concerned with Zhang Ziyu's safety. He could care less about the sect rules, so he extended his hand and knocked the long-winded fatty unconscious to the ground. Then, he ordered his subordinates to continue protecting everyone while he and Han Li turned and left quickly. When they reached the vicinity of Setting Sun Summit, the two of them were frightened by the sheer numbers of enemies. Knowing that it was impossible to charge forward, Han Li and Li Feiyu discussed with each other and came up with a brilliant plan. They knocked out two disciples of Broken Water Sect and changed into their clothes. Then, they took advantage of the dark sky and the crowd's confusion to stealthily mix in with those who were about to attack the mountain, follow the stream of traffic, and easily reach Setting Sun Summit. There, Han Li and Li Feiyu had heard everything that sect leader Wang had said. Because Crooked Soul's body was too conspicuous, they found an area at the bottom of the mountain in which they could hide him and left him there. After hearing that the Setting Sun Summit had kept such a deadly trump card that enabled it to perish with its enemies, Li Feiyu could not conceal his doubts and started to repeatedly ask Han Li, hoping that his good friend might set his heart at ease. Regardless whether this is true or fake, The most important thing to us right now is to quickly enter the main hall and meet with your young beloved and secretly slip away. You must be aware that regardless whether the information is authentic or not, staying here is too dangerous. Han Li finally replied in a low voice. This is all true, but under the watchful eye of the crowd, how it is possible to go in secretly? Li Feiyu asked, with a worried look on his face as he lowered his head. Sai, we can only wait and see if any opportunities arise later on. Han Li was also feeling quite helpless. Just as the two of them hiding at the back of the crowd started to get agitated, the ground beneath their feet suddenly trembled. At first, it was just a slight tremor, but subsequently, it became quite violent. A lot of people were unable to stand and began to tumble one by one onto the ground. Following the summit's trembling, there were also several mountain boulders that began to roll down. Not good, the mountain peak is about to collapse. That surnamed Wang wants to bring us down along with him. Some reckless person within the group shouted in a panic. When people heard this, the majority of them became even more panic-stricken. Some even disregarded previous Wang Juchu's warning and frantically tried to escape towards the road's intersection in an attempt to flee the mountain peak that they believed was about to collapse. Boom! A rumble of explosions rang out as the surrounding area started to collapse. The ground also shook more intensely. Hearing the loud noises, everyone thought that this was the start of the collapse of the mountain peak and couldn't help but to give up all hope. At this moment, Jia Tianlong was alarmed and furious. Even though he was escorted by the loyal Iron Guards, he was at a loss in his heart, unsure of what to do. He couldn't help but to look towards Monk Golden Light. Jia Tianlong smiled wryly after he clearly saw the look of panic on Monk Golden Light's face. So this person was also unable to protect himself. Jia Tianlong's initial admiration for this figure was immediately reduced. And here I thought people from Feral Wolf Gang were all fearless heroes. Turns out you are all a mob. At this moment, Wang Juchen suddenly ridiculed. Despite the confusion at the summit, Wang Juchen's words transmitted to everyone's ears, clearly caused by pure skill. Following his words, the ground miraculously stopped trembling. It was as if the mountain peak had suppressed its anger in a split second, recovering its former tranquility. At this moment, the crowd discovered that the small stone hall had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind an astonishingly large hole. A few courageous people took 2 paces forward and looked down from the edge. They couldn't help but gasp at the sight of the large, pitch-black hole. Since it was impossible to see the bottom of the hole, they knew that its depth was unfathomable. Commander Jia, can this evidence be considered proof of what I have to say? Wang Juchen coldly asked. Jia Tianlong's face paled slightly. He did not reply immediately. Instead, he surveyed his surroundings, only to see that everyone beside him had panicked and uncertain looks on their faces. In addition to the ordinary gang members and other gangs members, even the Iron Guards by his side had unsightly looks. Looking back, Jia Tianlong understood that he would be unable to accomplish his goal of completely annihilating Seven Mysteries Sect within a single night. It seemed that he needed to retreat first and consider the matter carefully once more before making a decision. Whatever conditions you have, you can state them, but you should be well aware of the situation. Even though it's like this, we are both tied, so don't go overboard, he exclaimed, not willing to accept the current outcome. As he turned his head around, there was a slight hint of extreme fury within his words. Chapter 85 Bloody Battle, Death Contract. Chapter 85 Bloody Battle, Death Contract. I only have 2 conditions and they are simple, Wang Juchu expressionlessly said. First, your men have to evacuate outside of my sect's sphere of influence, and they have to do so in groups under the supervision of my sect's disciples. His tone hardened considerably. Sure, that's not a problem, Jia Tianlong replied without hesitation. Seeing how his opponent answered so steadfastly, Wang Juchu coldly laughed as he directly told Jia Tianlong his second condition. Second, both you and I have to sign a death contract and fight in a duel before you all can leave. Death contract? Are you serious? Has he gone mad? As Wang Juchu's sentence left his mouth, it caused a huge ruckus to break out among the crowd. All those who heard the sentence had varied expressions on their faces. Some were excited, some were ashen, while some were eager to see the outcome of the duel. After hearing sect leader Wang's conditions, Jia Tianlong's expression flickered before swiftly reverting back to its normal state. Did I hear that condition incorrectly? Both of us sign a death contract and fight until there is only one survivor. After his seemingly nonchalant question, Jia Tianlong broke out into a laugh. "No, your ears are fine. This is to collect the blood debt for Vice Sect leader Wu and the others who died. Thus, I have no choice but to propose this. A death contract between you and me," Wang Juchu stated coldly, staring directly at Jia Tianlong with his hand on his sword. Jia Tianlong laughed but did not give an immediate reply. His eyes flashed while he pondered. It appeared that he did not dare to treat this lightly and would only answer after deep contemplation. Voices broke out in discussion among the crowd. Even the oblivious Han Li couldn't take it anymore and chose to question Li Feiyu, who was standing by his side instead. "What is a death contract? Seems like it's something incredible." "What? You don't even know about death contracts? This is too inconceivable. Of all the ways to settle the disputes of Jianghu, this is, by far, the most famous and bloody method." Stunned with amazement, Li Feiyu explained with a facial expression akin to the fascination of meeting a ghost. "You don't say. You should know that I barely know anything beyond God Hand Valley and have no interest regarding matters of Jianghu. Is it really so strange that I did not know?" Han Li replied in a low tone, seemingly in a bad mood. "Oh, right, true enough, I almost forgot." Li Feiyu scratched his head in embarrassment. The death contract is often used by two parties who have great hatred and enmity towards each other. Before their battle, they would sign a life-death statement, stating that after they enter the battle, they would battle until there would only be a single survivor. If someone left halfway, not only would that person's reputation plummet and face everyone's disdain, anyone in the entirety of Jianghu would have the right to kill him. Because all the people of Jianghu believe that death contracts are extremely sacred, those who destroy or taint the essence of this contract will be annihilated as a warning to others. What's more is that most of these battles are staged in arenas where people have often fought to death, consequently appearing even more bloody and cruel than normal. In recent years, the number of people using this method to resolve their disputes has lessened. Li Feiyu slowly and elaborately explained. After hearing the explanation, Han Li furrowed his brows as he understood the true meaning of death contracts. He seemed to disapprove of sect leader Wang's decision to enter into a death contract with Jia Tianlong. From his perspective, this would only end with one dead and one grievously injured. In the first place, if there was to be such an ending, it might as well not be started at all. Sect leader Wang might as well just let the enemy go free, or just kill the enemy straight away, saving himself from all this unnecessary trouble. "Fine, I agree. Let's enter into a death contract." After repeatedly deliberating, Jia Tianlong's gaze roaming about before riveting on the figure of Monk Golden Light. Then he made his final decision. Since Jia Tianlong's opponent wanted to use this as an excuse to kill him, wasn't this a good opportunity for him to remove the roots of the troublesome Seven Mysteries Sect? Jia Tianlong was very clear about what Wang Juchu was thinking. He obviously wanted the support of his three hidden martial uncles. But what a pity, he had already knew of their existences through reports from his spies and had already prepared countermeasures against them. With the immortal cultivator and his flying swords techniques by his side, his chances of winning the battle was definitely more than 90%. As long as he killed Wang Juchu as well as the remaining experts of the Seven Mysteries Sect during the deathmatch, it would be worth it. Even if his attack failed this time around, there was no cause for concern, because the next time he attacked, the Seven Mysteries Sect would no longer have any strength to resist. After all, nurturing an expert was not something that could be done within a single year. Thus, this was the reason why the cautious Jia Tianlong would now choose to take such a risk and agree to sign the death contract. Sect leader Wang, according to rules of the death contract, you should be the one to select the time and location of the battle. I will have no objections, but as for the number of fighters and methods of battle, I should be the one to decide, am I right? An enigmatic smile spread on Jia Tianlong's face. "HMMP, you are right," Wang Juchu answered somewhat unwillingly. "Okay then. I want the number of people fighting to be 150 men from each party in a battle royal." With no signs of being courteous, Jia Tianlong directly stated his request. 50 people, battle royal. Sect leader Wang's cold face actually revealed a hint of surprise. Death contract battles allowed multiple people to take part to prevent one side's strength to be greatly depleted. However, 20 or 30 people was already considered excessive, and Jia Tianlong's proposed method of battle royal, was rarely used in comparison to one-on-one battles. However, since it was Wang Juchu himself who requested the death contract battle, there was no way he could take back his words. Moreover, He was extremely confident in the battle prowess of his 3 senior martial uncles. Even if it was a battle royal, victory would most assuredly belong to his side. Moreover, as long as he was able to kill Jia Tianlong, it would be worth it no matter how great a price he had to pay. As long as this scheming Jia Tianlong died, he was sure that the forces under him would almost immediately try to fight to be the next gang leader, resulting in the gang splintering into different groups as they vied for power and authority. This would no longer make them a threat to Wang Juchu's Seven Mysteries Sect. As he thought of this, sect leader Wang nodded his head, agreeing to his opponent's request. "Men, go prepare the arena and the death contract," Wang Juchu commanded in a stern voice to the people standing behind him. Chapter 86: A Sudden Change. Chapter 86: A Sudden Change. Following his orders, 30 brightly dressed disciples rushed from the sect hall. None of these people uttered even a single word. In front of the hall, they wordlessly used wooden stakes and ropes to create the arena for the death fight. From their swift movements, it was evident that these people were proficient in martial arts, unlike the common low-ranking disciples of the Seven Mysteries Sect. Witnessing the sight of the duel being created, Li Feiyu asked Han Li in distraught, "Don't tell me that we're going to hide here the whole time. Are we going to do nothing and idly watch their duel? This isn't right." "This isn't right. Your young lover is currently not in danger and is actually quite safe. We'll wait for the duel to finish. Once the Pharaoh Wolf gang evacuates, we'll take advantage of the disorder and stealthily make our way to young Lady Zhang. Since the survivors of the Seven Mysteries Sect will most likely want to use you as a scapegoat and place all the blame on you, the two of you have to escape to a faraway place where they can't find you," Han Li said indifferently. It seemed that he didn't have a deep sense of belonging towards the Seven Mysteries Sect. "Wouldn't that be eloping? That won't do. Ziyuer wouldn't agree to it." Li Feiyu shook his head as if he were beating a drum with it. "Then knock her out and take her away by force. By the time she wakes up, it would be too late to change anything. Isn't that good enough?" Han Li replied nonchalantly. "You?" Li Feiyu angrily glared at Han Li, unable to speak another word. While these two individuals were completely engaged in a conversation with each other, sect leader Wang solemnly received 2 blood-red scrolls. These were the death contracts. He took one for himself and ordered someone to bring the other to Jia Tianlong, who was across from him. As Jia Tianlong accepted the document, his expression changed to one of solemnness. He carefully opened the document and cautiously skimmed through it. Once he verified that there was no problem, he nodded his head and closed the document. He then began selecting soldiers to fight in the deathmatch. After filtering through his available men, he selected 13 elite experts from the Pharaoh Wolf gang. In addition, he selected tens of martial artists with acceptable talents from the smaller gangs in order to lessen his own losses. In any case, once they signed their names on the death contract, these martial artists would have to fight with all their might in order to preserve their insignificant lives, regardless of whether or not they were willing. As for the remaining candidates, Jia Tianlong picked some of his capable iron guards. Of course, Monk Golden Light was certain to take the stage. Jia Tianlong was completely counting on the great martial prowess of this immortal cultivator's flying sword technique. While Jia Tianlong was busy, he did not notice that Wang Juchu had returned to the stone hall. Until now, Jia Tianlong still hadn't seen sect leader Wang return, making Jia Tianlong think that Wang Juchu was probably having difficulty deciding the candidates for the deathmatch. When the deathmatch stage had been thoroughly completed, sect leader Wang brought out 300 to 400 people out from the hall. Within this crowd was a mixture of young and old disciples of both genders. However, each and every one of them had a spirited light in their eyes and walked with steady steps. It was evident they were the Seven Mysteries Sect's elites. The ones Jia Tianlong was most cautious of were the 3 figures following behind Wang Juchu. The first individual wore a fluttering scholar's jacket, and his face appeared intellectual and scholarly-like. The second was tall and sturdy with his chest bare. His full beard, resembling steel needles, gave him a valiant appearance that was incomparable. Last was a person wearing gray clothes. He carried a long sword on his back and had a cold expression. At first glance, these people seemed to be middle-aged men, 30 to 40 years old. However, close examination revealed that they released an aura that exuded the passage of time, an aura equivalent to that of an elderly man of 70 to 80 years. It made onlookers feel like the ages of these middle-aged men did not match their young external appearances. TL, passage of time, literally means the blue sea turned into mulberry fields. Figuratively, it represents the worldly passage of time or how time brings a great change to the world. Jia Tianlong's mind was clear. These three were definitely Wang Jiuchu's three martial uncles. It seemed that the Seven Mysteries Sect would not hold anything back, even going as far as summoning its reserves. Thinking of this, Jia Tianlong leaned to the side and pointed his finger at those three martial uncles for the dwarf mink golden light. He asked, "Monk, I don't know how you feel about those three, but can you take them down? They are nothing more than ordinary folk. With a wave of my flying swords, their small lives will be finished. What is there to be worried about? Do you not trust me?" Monk Golden Light said this with a somewhat dismissive tone and gave Jia Tianlong a dissatisfied glare. I wouldn't dare. I merely asked without thinking. Please do not take it to heart, monk." Jia Tianlong promptly responded with a smiling face, fearing that he might have offended the person on whom he was currently most relying. Humph! After the dwarf heard these words, his anger gradually vanished. Only after seeing this did Jia Tianlong's heart calm down. This great immortal cultivator was truly not easy to please. He bitterly smiled to himself and hastily turned his body before shouting loudly, "Are you not ready? Begin signing the death contract." Following this berating voice, those from the feral wolf gang that were participating in the deathmatch started to solemnly write down their names on the death contract. After they signed their names, their fighting spirit burst forth. Not to be outdone, Wang Jiuchu commanded with a cold voice, "Sign the death contract." Immediately, tens of warriors who had been chosen to participate emerged from the crowd of Seven Mysteries Sect members and walked forward to sign the death contract. Henley's gaze naturally fell on those who marched out as he tried to see if there were any acquaintances among them. He also saw sect leader Wang's three martial uncles. However, he didn't take them to mind. He skimmed the crowd with a hurried glance until an elderly man with a blue-green jacket entered his line of sight. With a single look at this old man's appearance, Han Li could not help but exhale in a low voice, "Elder Li." This was the man whose life Han Li had actually saved before, Ma Rong's master, Elder Li. He was unexpectedly a participant of the deathmatch. This was far beyond Han Li's expectations. Han Li retracted his gaze and hastily turned his face. Slapping Li Feiyu's shoulder with all his strength, he said, "Did you see that? Elder Li is there and wants to sign the death contract." Li Feiyu expressionlessly stood there, motionless, as he surveyed the distance from an elevated view. As if he hadn't heard his friend, Li Feiyu had an extremely stupefied expression. "Hey, what's the matter?" Han Li was somewhat surprised. "Even if Elder Li wants to sign the death contract, it's not like he's going to die, right?" he strangely asked. Once Li Feiyu heard those words, his vision finally returned. He blankly gazed at Han Li and uttered a sentence that instantly stunned Han Li. Ziyuer, she is also there. She also wants to participate in the death contract battle." Upon uttering these words, Li Feiyu's face instantly became extremely unsightly. Chapter 87 Prominent Skill. Chapter 87 Prominent Skill. "Where?" Han Li hastily asked after he came to his senses. "There." Following Li Feiyu's gaze, Han Li finally found a pale-faced Zhang Ziyuer within the corner of the crowd. At this moment, she was standing with two other girls who were also participating in the deathmatch. Wearing thin white clothing, she slightly bit her almond lips, making her whole figure seem like a white-colored flower, lovely and fragile. How could weak women like Lady Zhang participate in such a bloody battle? Did that one surnamed Wang make a mistake? Han Li, who was still unwilling to believe his eyes, questioned incredulously. "Ziyuer is also an inner disciple of the Seven Supreme Division. Did I not tell you before?" Li Feiyu replied, smiling bitterly as he said something that Han Li felt was unexpected. Han Li remained silent and speechless. It was clearly evident that the Seven Mysteries Sect's remaining experts were few in number, and that sect leader Wang did not have any protective feelings for the Pharaoh S**X. In order to prevail in this dire situation, he even sent out a girl like Zhang Ziyuer, almost as if he was planning to stake everything on this one move. "Brother, I'll get straight to the point. I want to be with Zhang Ziyuer. Take care of yourself," Li Feiyu lightly said, placing his hand onto Han Li's shoulder. He then turned his body and walked towards the arena. He hadn't even walked 2 steps before he heard a light sigh from behind him, followed closely by a fluctuation in the air. Instantly, another person appeared by his side, Han Li. "What's so big about this? Isn't it only a death contract battle? This small situation is not difficult for me to handle. Since we are friends, I can help you with this small matter," Han Li said with a hint of a smile. Having heard this, Li Feiyu did not say anything further and exerted his strength to pat Han Li's chest, quietly saying, "Good brother, thank you so much." Han Li kept a smile on his face, not saying another word. It was just as he said. The reason why he followed was partly because he knew Li Feiyu for quite a long time, so their relationship was quite close. As such, Han Li was unwilling to look on helplessly as Li Feiyu ventured off by himself. On the other hand, Han Li was a highly skilled and bold individual. He did not believe that the Feral Wolf Gang's so-called experts could pose much of a threat to him with his fireball and imperial flight technique. On top of this, he also was a bit eager to test his own strength. The two men strode forward, squeezing through the crowd and heading straight for Wang Juchu's side. Halfway, the two ripped off their broken water sect uniforms, revealing their Seven Mysteries Sect attires. Han Li and Li Feiyu's sudden appearance and change in identity caused both sides to stare at them foolishly. No one tried to prevent their movements, allowing them to easily arrive in front of Wang Juchu. Division Head Li. Dr. Han. Upon seeing Li Feiyu, Zhang Ziyu was pleased beyond expectation. Her coquettish face revealed her to be pleasantly surprised, and if the area wasn't filled with so many people, she might have thrown herself in her lover's embrace, pouring her heart out. Sect leader Wang also recognized the two individuals, his eyes revealing a trace of surprise. To him, their sudden appearance was very unexpected. External Blade Division's Division Head Deputy Li Feiyu pays his respects to the sect leader. Li Feiyu spoke loudly. "The two of us wish to sign the death contract and join the deathmatch." He directly stated his request, not waiting for the others to question him about his appearance. Meanwhile, Han Li stood to the side without making a sound, maintaining an appearance similar to that of Li Feiyu and sect leader Ma. Hearing Li Feiyu speak, sect leader Wang swallowed down the words he was originally obligated to ask. The cold look on his face revealed a hint of a smile as he warmly said, "Very well, as expected of our Seven Mysteries Sect's loyal disciples. With Division Head Li joining the battle, the sect will surely receive a better chance at victory. However, I think it would be better if Dr. Han does not join. After all, his medical expertise is very crucial to our sect. If something were to happen to him in the deathmatch, it would be a fatal loss." Hearing these words, Han Li gave a faint smile. Instead of waiting for Li Feiyu's explanation, he shifted slightly, causing his body to disappear right in front of sect leader Wang. Sect leader Wang was surprised, and just as he was about to look in all four sides, he heard Han Li's lazy voice drift over from behind him. "I don't know if my own skill is worthy of sect leader Ma's attention, but if I were to enter the deathmatch, I believe that I would be able to protect myself. Therefore, I hope that sect leader will accept my loyalty." Sect leader Ma's heart was overwhelmed with shock. He would have never thought that Han Li, who was renowned in the sect for his medical expertise, would also possess such a terrifying martial skill. Unexpectedly, Han Li was able to soundlessly penetrate Wang Juchu's defense and approach his back without attracting Wang Juchu's attention. Such terrifying skill, just who exactly is this person? Hidden within our sect, just what is his purpose? A train of fearful ideas sprang forth in quick succession within Wang Juchu's mind. He turned his body and looked at the seemingly harmless Han Li. Sect leader Wang couldn't help but draw his gaze to his own three martial uncles, only to see that the three martial uncles' facial expressions had also changed slightly. Their eyes revealed a hint of shock, making it evident that Dr. Han's skill caused them to feel unrestrained fear. A series of different thoughts rushed around in sect leader Wang's mind, but he finally made a decision. He abruptly laughed loudly before cordially saying, "Dr. Han's heart must have been wholly devoted to the sect. As the sect leader, how could I possibly refuse?" He then used his finger to point at the two disciples whose skills were the weakest out of all of them. They stepped out of the lineup, allowing Han Li and Li Feiyu to take their places. Sect leader Wang also allowed Han Li and Li Feiyu to use black ink to write their names in the blood-red death contract, permitting them to become members of the deathmatch. The commotion within the Seven Mysteries Sect was naturally witnessed by Jia Tianlong, and even though he felt that the adding of two experts was a bit unexpected, he did not put it within his heart. After all, he believed that the fleshy body of mortals would be unable to stop Monk Golden Light's flying sword technique. Therefore, both sides finished signing their respective death contracts and exchanging them, thus signaling the start of the deathmatch. Only one side would be able to leave alive. Chapter 88 Golden Light Barrier. Chapter 88 Golden Light Barrier. Monk Golden Light had a prideful expression on his face as he stood in the middle of the arena, with the members of the Feral Wolf gang standing behind him. Before he emerged, he had already guaranteed Jia Tianlong that he alone would be sufficient to face all the challengers from the Seven Mysteries Sect. But of course, the price for his services would have to be adjusted accordingly from the previously agreed amount of 5,000 taels of gold to 8,000 taels of gold. The moment when Monk Golden Light thought about the rewards he would be receiving after the battle, a fiery heat rose in his heart. He stared disdainfully at the crowd, straining himself to hold back from slaughtering all the members of the Seven Mysteries Sect. Instead of being with Li Feiyu, Han Li stood at the other side of the crowd. Since Li Feiyu and Zhang Ziyu were standing together, whispering sweet words of affection to each other, Han Li naturally would not be so rude as to intrude into the personal world of the two lovebirds. Seriously, what is he thinking about when he is with his young lover? To think that they could still talk about their emotions and love right now when we are about to fight for the sect's survival. Han Li felt a sour taste in his mouth. After he came back to his senses, Han Li, like the rest of the sect members, stared curiously at the dwarf standing in the arena. The Feral Wolf gang's participants all hiding in the back. This is too incredible. They actually allowed such a dirty-looking dwarf to begin the fight. Could it be that the dwarf has some sort of strange and profound martial technique? Han Li blinked his eyes as he pondered in his heart. Sect leader Wang's thoughts flowed down the same path as Han Li's. Instead of rashly allowing his sect members to swamp the arena, he selected a protector wielding a saber to test the waters. It seemed like he intended to scout out his opponent first before making a decision, so that there wouldn't be any accidental casualties. Although the battle format was supposed to be a battle royal, if one side only sent out a single man, it would unquestionably become a one-on-one fight. As sect leader Wang thought about this, he decided to act as such. When Monk Golden Light saw only a single man approaching him, he roughly knew in his heart what his opponent was thinking. He. The sound of a strange laughter emerged from his throat. His voice was capable of breaking apart drums, causing those who heard it to tremble uncontrollably. The protector that Wang Juchu sent out was a strong warrior more than 30 years old with an extremely valiant appearance. His hands, wielding the saber, were tightly clustered with visible green veins. One look was sufficient enough for one to know that he was extremely proficient with the saber. Even after hearing Monk Golden Light's strange laughter, his heart remained unshaken, which proved that he had experienced countless battles. As Monk Golden Light saw the strong warrior approaching him, he stopped his weird laughter and nonchalantly took out a piece of yellow paper from inside his robes. The yellow paper was inscribed with words and patterns that glowed with a golden light, and Han Li could tell with a single glance that this item was extremely valuable. The dwarf ignored the approaching warrior. Instead of moving forward, he held the yellow paper in one hand and started chanting an incantation. Although the strong warrior from the Seven Mysteries Sect was unsure of what mad plot his opponent was hatching, his fighting experience was incomparably vast, and he understood that it would be best to finish off the dwarf before the dwarf completed the incantation, in case the battle became disadvantageous for him. As a result, he didn't even pause to think before his body vigorously leapt into the air, drawing close to the body of Monk Golden Light with a few steps. He raised the steel saber in his hand, and with a glint of cold light, he struck against the head of his opponent. The strike was swift, ferocious, and heavy, filled with all of his strength. As soon as his eyes witnessed the edge of the saber landing on Monk Golden Light's head, the incantation had already been completed. Before the steel saber could come into contact with his body, Monk Golden Light held the piece of yellow paper against his body. Abruptly, a piercing ray of golden light flashed, emanating from the hand that held the yellow paper. This extremely golden piercing ray of light blinded the strong warrior, but he did not have the slightest hint of panic, continuing to swing his steel saber downwards. Dang! The sound of metal clashing resounded throughout the entire arena. The strong warrior felt a wave of heat from web of skin between his thumb and index finger as the saber he was wielding almost flew out of his hands, causing him to be shocked. Although both his eyes had not managed to see clearly, he knew that the situation was perilous. He tiptoed as he backtracked a distance of several zhang before pausing. Brandishing his saber, he maintained his position. At this moment, he could hear the crowd in the arena letting out gasps of shock and astonishment. The strong warrior began to get worried after hearing the crowd's reaction. He desperately wanted to know what had happened and why was his clash with the dwarf so bizarre. Fortunately, his eyes had recovered his vision, and he hurriedly shifted his gaze forward, only to see the dwarf standing motionlessly several zhang ahead of him. His entire body seemed to emit an aura of golden light an inch wide around him. This golden light was akin to a thick armor, enveloping the dwarf and giving him a level of protection that was impervious to even the wind and rain. The protector's saber attack had struck the barrier of the golden light and did not manage to even wound the dwarf's body. The protector did not understand the origin of the golden light that was as tough as steel and iron. It had actually made his saber attack ineffective. Although the protector had vast amounts of experience, this was the first time he had seen such an incredible thing, causing him to be stunned. Wielding the steel saber, he was worried, not knowing whether he should advance or retreat. Not only was the protector stunned, the spectators in the crowd were astonished as well. Within Jianghu, the number of individuals who knew immortal cultivators were extremely sparse, especially within such a remote location like State of Yue. As such, the golden light manifested by the yellow paper was extremely mysterious and unfathomable to the members of the Seven Mysteries Sect. Jia Tianlong felt joy in his heart as he witnessed those from the Seven Mysteries Sect looking at each other with dismay. Standing at the back of the crowd was Han Li, who was even more astonished than the others. Han Li knew that on this mountain peak, there was no one other than the dwarf who understood how to use magic techniques. It was obvious to him that the dwarf used an incantation similar to that of Soul Lock Talisman. However, Han Li felt that this technique was even more powerful than the Soul Lock Talisman. When no one was watching, Han Li quickly activated Heaven's Eye technique by reciting its incantations. Having activated it, he hurriedly turned his gaze in the dwarf's direction. He saw that beneath the golden aura, there was a flickering white light on the dwarf's body. When compared to the golden aura, this white light was too faint. If one was not looking for it, he or she would have most likely not been able to notice its existence. This dwarf was actually an immortal cultivator, whose magic power was much lower than Han Li's. This caused Han Li to be delighted and anguished at the same time. He was delighted because, as a beginner, his magic power was richer when compared to the dwarf's, which signified that the dwarf had merely dabbled in immortal cultivation. Han Li also felt anguished because he did not know whether or not the dwarf knew any other magic techniques of which he was not aware. As such, he was not sure if he would be able to handle the dwarf. Chapter 89 Spear and Shield. Chapter 89 Spear and Shield. Han Li turned his head to look at sect leader Wang, who had a gloomy countenance. In that moment, the three men standing near sect leader Wang had a great change in expression and started talking amongst themselves. It seemed that the dwarf's golden light was not something to be trifled with. Covered by the golden light, the dwarf started laughing with his head facing the sky. Soon after, he domineeringly shouted, "This venerable master is standing here motionlessly and will allow you to attack as you please. If there is no one here capable of breaking this monk's gold barrier, then not a single one of your insignificant lives will be spared." After this was said, he gave an arrogant sneer. Monk Goldenlight's speech had thoroughly changed the Seven Mysteries Sect disciples' apprehension into rage. Immediately, many valiant martial artists wanted to rush out from the crowd and charge straight toward the dwarf. However, sect leader Wang stopped them. Wang Juchu waved his arm, signaling the protectors at the scene to return. Then, he said a few words to the tall and sturdy man, who nodded his head and walked step by step toward the dwarf, upright and unafraid. As the dwarf saw the fully bearded man walking toward him, a malicious gaze flashed in his eyes. Because his natural body was deformed, he had been ridiculed since a young age. As a result, he especially detested bold individuals with tall and lofty figures. This man before him fell within his scope of resentment. He was already thinking of what cruel method he should use to torment him. The bare-chested man was one of Wang Juchu's three martial uncles. If one did not see his full bearded face, they would have thought him to be an oaf. However, his true age had already passed a cycle of 60 years. He used to be known as a valiant and brave individual in the Seven Mysteries Sect, killing countless enemies for the sake of the sect. Confronted with this strange golden barrier, he naturally would not act rashly. This person examined the barrier and glanced at Monk Golden Light protected within. He cracked a smile, and with two extended fingers, he flicked the golden barrier, causing a clear dang sound. This frivolous act agitated Monk Golden Light. He sinisterly said, "Do you wish for this immortal master to send you to an early reincarnation?" As the martial uncle listened to these words, his expression changed. He unexpectedly strode forward a single step, arriving at the dwarf's side. Lifting his leg once more, he appeared behind the dwarf. In order to get to the mind of Monk Golden Light, the martial uncle circled around him with long strides and increasingly faster revolutions. In a blink of an eye, his figure became indistinct. Monk Golden Light was incapable of seeing him clearly. Monk Golden Light had become dizzy from the opponent's continuous rotations, causing the fury in his heart to intensify. Without taking the time to think, he brought his hand to the inside of his robe, seemingly with the intention to take something out. Just then, the circling bearded man naturally took notice of his opponent's actions. He suddenly let out a long whistle that resembled a dragon's cry and a tiger's hiss. The whistle was both strong and lengthy. It shook the ears of everyone on Setting Sun's summit with a droning noise that also affected leaves and branches of the trees nearby. After Monk Golden Light heard the whistle, his shaking hands were rendered powerless. His hand stretched toward his bosom, but unexpectedly, he did not withdraw it. Suddenly, the sharp, loud sounds of bursting joints came from the bearded man. They grew more and more hurried until finally the sounds were like the winds and rain of a torrential storm. The sounds had even covered the whistling. The bearded man had circled to the front of the dwarf and stopped. He then stopped whistling, and the sound of his joints bursting had stopped. At this moment, those who were clear-headed discovered that the bearded man's body had changed dramatically since his revolutions. The muscles on his chest and arms were greatly bulging outwards and were pure black, as if cast in living iron. When compared to the dwarf, it was as if he were a giant. While Monk Golden Light was gasping for air, he took out a thin, long box from his bosom. This wooden box was completely dark and was covered by a paper talisman that sealed the contents. Without waiting for the dwarf to tear off the paper talisman, the gigantic spirited man extended his huge hand like a palm leaf fan, and without politeness, he ruthlessly smashed against the golden light. The strike rocked the barrier, deforming it and causing the dwarf to sway incessantly, making the unstable dwarf incapable of tearing off the paper talisman. Monk Golden Light's mind was overwhelmed with shock. He was fully aware of the might of the golden barrier surrounding him. This man was actually capable of striking and deforming it, which required a great amount of godly force. The contempt in his heart could not help but almost entirely vanish. His hands moved more quickly to tear off the paper talisman. With the sound of tearing paper, the talisman had finally been ripped off. Monk Golden Light's face showed an expression of joy. He then heard a thump as the bearded man unleashed strikes against the golden barrier in quick succession. The dwarf's body swayed accordingly and was unable to remain standing, causing his buttocks to fall to the floor. Only at this moment did he discover that the man had used both hands and legs to assault the golden barrier like a squall. His current golden barrier was the same as kneaded dough, with the opponent's punches and kicks creating new dents, bulges, and warped deformations on the barrier. It seemed that the layer of golden light could break at any moment underneath the martial uncle's fierce assault. Seeing this, Monk Golden Light's expression drastically changed. Flustered, he was no longer capable of maintaining the poise of an immortal master, and instead proceeded to chant an incantation. Unfortunately, he had made many errors in this hurried attempt, so there wasn't the slightest result. That black box hadn't moved even a jolt. In the back, Jia Tianlong saw everything and was somewhat amazed. On one hand, he was amazed by Monk Golden Light's idiotic actions and obliviousness. On the other hand, he felt awe as he witnessed the martial prowess belonging to Wang Juchu's martial uncle, who could test the power of the golden barrier belonging to Monk Golden Light. The barrier could truly be considered impervious to sword and spear. Water and fire couldn't penetrate it either, similar to its ineffectiveness against a diamond-hard shield. Unexpectedly, this golden barrier was trembling greatly under this person's punches and kicks, and accumulated deformations according to the martial uncle's wishes. This was truly inconceivable. This man's skill was a great and profound mystery. He recalled that there still existed two more similar experts in addition to the bearded man. For the first time since he had rashly agreed to the opponent's deathmatch, Jia Tianlong felt slightly regretful. He now understood why the opposition had requested a deathmatch with complete confidence. Wang Juchu actually had these three freakish experts to rely on. If Jia Tianlong were in his shoes, he would have also requested a bloody battle. Thinking of this, Jia Tianlong looked at the disadvantaged dwarf. He already considered whether or not he should send assistance to this self-proclaimed immortal master to avoid having this expert die such a muddle-headed death without even using his flying swords technique. Chapter 90 Flying Sword. Chapter 90 Flying Sword. From the situation in the arena, it seemed that the violent man held an absolute advantage. However, no one knew that this particular person, who seemed to be incomparably mighty, was actually secretly grumbling to himself. Every fist he unleashed caused a portion of the barrier of golden light to cave in. The impacts fiercely vibrated the barrier. It would only be a matter of time before the barrier would be totally destroyed. But no one knew that every time the man's fists had come into contact with the golden light, the man could feel a sharp wave of rebound energy that seemed to reciprocate the strength he used. Currently, all four of his limbs were grievously damaged. He knew that once the effects of his skill faded, all of his limbs would probably be immensely swollen. In addition, the barrier of golden light had an insane recovery rate. After a short while, the portions that he caved in with his attacks would immediately return back to their original shapes, as if the barrier was never damaged in the first place. Moreover, his previous attacks were aimed randomly at the barrier of golden light, merely causing its shape to be distorted. But other than that, there seemed to be no other effect on the barrier whatsoever. The tall and sturdy man continued in this manner for a period of time, while the barrier of golden light vibrated intensely, as if it would break apart at any moment. Now, the thoughts of everyone present went in the opposite direction. They understood that this tall and sturdy man's attacks were unable to destroy the golden barrier. His immense strength would at most be able to create some dents on the barrier, but it would not able to completely destroy it. So not only did Jia Tianlong abolish the idea of sending reinforcements, but the dwarf also regained his former composure. But because he had embarrassed himself earlier, Monk Golden Light's features seemed to have a trace of embarrassment, and as he stared at the strong and sturdy man, his gaze became increasingly malevolent. But because he was suffering the barrage of attacks from his opponent, his body was unable to stand straight, and every magic technique he intended to cast misfired. As such, he stopped his incantations and stared intently at his opponent, while muttering a string of curses under his breath in an unknown language. As for the tall and sturdy man, he did not feel any changes, so he continued frenziedly attacking the golden barrier. The spectators all thought that this individual had boundless energy and would never need to rest. Clang, clang, clatter. Exerting his full strength, that ferocious man unleashed 2 strikes and a kick before turning his back in retreat. That massive frame of his did not seem to hinder his speed. The man's actions caused the spectators to be shocked. A commotion arose shortly after. Monk Golden Light was shocked as well, but he swiftly flew into a rage. He hurriedly sat down and crossed his legs. Placing a black box horizontally onto his lap, he began to mumble an incantation. Both his hands were extended in front of his chest in a strange position as he shivered forcefully, expending a seemingly tremendous amount of energy. Looking at the violent convulsions shaking the dwarf's body, everyone present thought it was as if all the fingers on his hands possessed the strength of 1,000 jinn. TL, 1 jinn is equal to 0.5 kg or 1.102 lb. At this moment, the tall and sturdy man had already left the area designated for the Seven Mysteries Sect, as if he wanted to retreat back to the crowd. However, he suddenly heard a loud voice from behind his back. "Rise!" He saw the face of Wang Juchu, who was standing in front of him, fall drastically as the audience collectively shouted out, "Be careful!" The tall and sturdy man trembled as he hurriedly dodged to the left and cast a side glance at the dwarf, only to see a ray of gray light swiftly approaching his previous position, missing him by a narrow margin. His heart froze, but he relaxed, since he had managed to dodge this hidden weapon attack. He would be reunited with his 2 senior martial uncles soon, and could then take a breather. But before he had even completed this thought, he felt an extreme pain in his right arm. As he turned his gaze, another exclamation of shock could be heard from the audience. Within that cacophony of noise, the voices of his 2 senior martial uncles were heard, filled with immense worry and apprehension. That man was slightly stunned, as if he did not understand what had happened. At this moment, he saw another ray of gray light appear in his line of sight, piercing through his chest. Looking at the shape of the weapon, it appeared to be the same hidden weapon that he had dodged earlier. The man was shocked and angered. He wanted to open his mouth to say something, but as the sound "Pu Tong" rang out, his body collapsed on the ground. It was only at this moment that the man realized that his right arm had already been broken without him being aware. Fresh blood flowed unceasingly from the wound. "What happened?" the man asked, his stomach full of confusion and unwillingness. But soon after, his vision went black as his consciousness faded into oblivion. Even until the point of death, he was not able to understand what had happened. but the members from both the Feral Wolf Gang and the Seven Mysteries Sect were able to see clearly what had happened. From what they understood, after Monk Golden Light had finished his incantation and shouted "Rise," a ray of gray light shot forth from the black box, spiraling around the head of the dwarf before following the direction that his finger was pointing in and flying towards that tall and sturdy man. Although the man dodged out of reflex, avoiding the strike through his chest, he had no way to avoid the attack that was directed to the back of his arm. It seemed that the ray of gray light was incredibly sharp. Even after slicing his arm, the man still had no knowledge or realization that something had happened. Afterwards, the crowd was even more astounded. After the ray of gray light was avoided, it continued following the finger movements of the dwarf, flying far ahead in front of the warrior and abruptly changed directions. It pierced straight through the chest of the defenseless man and easily robbed him of his life. Everyone was stunned into silence by what had just occurred, and instinctively fixed their gazes on the ray of gray light that had returned to the dwarf and was now spiraling above the dwarf's head. The words "flying sword" appeared involuntarily in the majority of the spectators' minds. Although these people did not know about the existence of immortal cultivators, even they had heard of the various legends and miraculous stories of flying swords. This ray of gray light was extremely similar to the rumored flying sword used by the legendary immortals. Could the unsightly dwarf be one of the fabled sword immortals? The majority of the crowd fixated their gazes, now filled with respect, at the dwarf. The title of sword immortal was enough to cause many mortals to be filled with fear. Monk Golden Light now held his head high with his chest out, considering himself to be unparalleled in this world. He manipulated the ray of gray light to soar above his head in a wild dance until it resembled a huge gray python, causing exclamations of awe to come out from the Feral Wolf Gang. On the other hand, those representing the Seven Mysteries Sect were speechless and downcast. Imminent defeat was apparent in their hearts. If one were to say that the morale of Jia Tianlong's men was greatly increased while that of the Seven Mysteries Sect was greatly diminished, he or she would not be wrong. After all, Jia Tianlong had managed to enlist the aid of a sword immortal. Han Li was the only one in the crowd who felt extreme joy in his heart. Han Li realized that this Monk Golden Light's flying sword technique was exactly the same as the telekinesis technique that he himself had learned. Although he did not know if the ray of gray light was indeed a sword, he knew that telekinesis technique could only control tangible objects. This fact was undeniable. Currently, Han Li's heart surged with the intent to fight. It seemed that his interest towards this fellow immortal cultivator was growing increasingly high.